Dark Souls is a series of games that have become a genre unto themselves. A truly groundbreaking moment for gaming, harking back to a time when men were men, women were women, and gamers were friendless basement-dwelling neckbeards. Now I know what you're thinking, how could someone possibly make a video about Dark Souls all the way in 2022? After all, this game has been dissected more times than a cadaver at a discount medical school. Just searching Dark Souls on YouTube, you can find entire channels dedicated to the lore, guides, walkthroughs, analysis, speedruns, and the dankest of memes. And some of them aren't even Vadividya. So what more is left to say? How can we make a truly unique video about the last truly unique IP to come out of gaming? Fucking beats me. So instead of trying to stretch my silky smooth brain out to be in some way innovative, we're just gonna do them all. We're gonna be going through every area, ranking every single boss, talking about the game in the progression that most people take their first time through. There's gonna be Guinevere boobies, there's gonna be Priscilla feet, we're gonna simp over Solaire, and we're gonna bitch about how bad the Capra Demon fight is. And you are about to witness the first ever retrospective all bosses speedrun attempt. I am your host, Dan, filling in for Machomatosis, and you are watching the Steam Pilgrimage, the show where we attempt to finish every game in our Steam backlog, a task which is almost as difficult as the subject of today's video. Roll intro! Despite all the talking I did in the beginning, Dark Souls is a series that needs very little introduction. It is the conceptual love child of unhinged genius and monster girl foot fanatic Hidetaki Miyazaki. Miyazaki was a bit of a late bloomer, deciding to make a career out of video game development at the ripe old age of 29. He was eventually hired by From Software and worked as a director on a number of Armored Core games before being put in charge of a new medieval first-person action RPG. He was essentially told to make a game that could rival the success of Oblivion. His response was essentially, no, fuck you, I'm gonna go revolutionize the modern gaming landscape instead. And after a number of months constantly lying to the executives of both Sony and From Software about the nature of the game that he was making, Demon's Souls was released exclusively to the Japanese market with an expectation of it absolutely flunking. Well, it turns out that they were wrong. Soon, hype started building in the West for the game to come overseas, and after a few positive review scores from game journalists who magically somehow managed to finish the game, it became an instant success. Going on to spawn the Soulsborne series, sometimes called the Soulsborne Akiro series, and soon to be the Soulsborne Akiro Ring Saga, as well as the Souls-like genre. But my dear viewer, this video is not about the production of the Dark Souls franchise. This video is about the post-production playing experience of the Dark Souls franchise. For this video, I'm going to be taking more or less the intended route through the game and talking about the different aspects of each section or location as we go. This includes laying out the basic lore of the levels and bosses, as well as the game design techniques and how the game communes its ideas and concepts to the player. This means that it might end up being pretty long though, so feel free to use the timestamps in the description to split up your viewing experience. Before we start, here's the obligatory like, share, comment, subscribe, blah blah blah, you've heard it before. Let's get into the video! Man, the character creator in the first Dark Souls game is limited, let's just say that. You can change your hairstyle, your hair color, skin tone, and some various facial proportions, but that's about it. And you're going to be spending most of your time looking at the back of your character's head anyway, so it doesn't matter that much. The real choice that you have to make, of course, is how thick you're going to be. After messing around with the modeler, it's time to start picking the important choices that will actually affect your playthrough, mainly your starting class and starting item. And this is where we come up against the first real challenge that the game throws at you, trying to figure out what the fuck all this stuff means. The little descriptions that they give you for each class are almost insulting compared to the complexity of the RPG mechanics, which compared to other games, aren't actually that difficult to understand, although they are fairly unique. Let's take the Wanderer class as an example of this. The description reads like something that I would write in a pay-per-word Lonely Hearts advert. Aimless Wanderer, wields scimitar, high dexterity. no smokers. For a first time player, this can mean a whole bunch of things. You might assume that high dex makes you faster or more agile. You might think that you have some kind of specialty when it comes to using scimitars. And most importantly, you might be wrong. All of this info is irrelevant because all that really matters are your stats and your overall level. Despite choosing a starting class, Dark Souls is far more build focused than class focused. Regardless of where you start out, you can eventually move into any playstyle you want. It truly is some epic anime shit. The only thing you need to do is to meet the requirements for whichever weapon, armor, or spell you wish to use. Each item you can equip has a level requirement as well as a parameter bonus, which is basically how much more effective that item becomes as you level up a certain skill. And one of Dark Souls' most heinous crimes as a game is explaining absolutely none of this before you start playing, and then almost hiding these explanations once you're in the game itself. This is one of the few times where I think that one of those old school, like PlayStation 1 or NES manuals would have actually been a good addition to this game. Once you understand the system though, it's actually incredibly simple to work with and allows for a huge amount of viability of builds. There are very few weapons or strategies that are completely unusable in Dark Souls except for rapiers, but you can quite quickly end up with an underpowered character if you don't invest in the right stats for your playstyle. The overall level of your character is determined by how many points they've spent on skills, and it determines how expensive your next level up is going to be. So you can go for the level 1 Pyromancer, who has relatively weak stats, with none of them being exceptionally high, but you do have the most wiggle room to work with as you progress. Or you can take the Deprived, who has the highest starting level of 6 and an 11 in every stat. A very well rounded out character, but carving out your niche in the early game is going to be a little bit more expensive than with other classes. Every class also starts with its own set of gear. Everybody but the Deprived gets a full armor set, and everybody gets a shield and a weapon. The filthy casual, the spellcasters also get their spellcasting focus. Starting equipment can be a determining factor for which class that you pick, but most of the armor sets can be found somewhere in the game, and most people who play the game multiple times will be going for pure stats over equipment. The other big choice here is the starting gift, and here's where we start getting into some deep lore. So if you want to skip my diatribe on the significance of the broken pendant, you can jump to the timestamp on screen. Okay, in all seriousness though, the Master Key is the #1 choice unless you're doing a speed run, in which case some people take the black fire bombs, but they usually play as the thief who starts with the Master Key anyway, so it's all the same really, just take the Master Key. Usually I would play as either the Pyro or the Warrior, but on this run I'm going to be picking the Cleric. The main reason for this is that I want early access to miracles so that I can heal more between bonfires and can spend longer exploring while I record my footage. I am not looking to be fancy in how I play, and I've beaten this game enough times now that I can talk about each section from the perspective of a bunch of different playstyles. But for the purposes of recording my playthrough, I want to partake in a little bit of cheesing, okay? I got nothing to prove, go yell about it in the comments. For a game that's known for its cryptic storytelling, the opening cinematic is some of the most straightforward exposition in the entire series. In the time before man, I can't do Vadivijit. In the time before man, the world was still in grey. The only known beings to inhabit the world at this point are the ancient dragons and the arch trees. The grey world is a tranquil place, everything being the same with no disparity. It's only when the first flame erupts, bringing both the light and the inevitable darkness which must exist in a world full of light, that the first vestiges of other life begin to rise. Hollow beings, the beginning of humanity, are drawn to the flame, and 4 great Lord souls are found. 3 of these souls are taken by the Lords of Lordran, namely Nito, the spooky boy, the Wicked Witch of West Izalith, and basically Zeus but less horny. The 4th soul goes to the elusive midget, essentially humanity's progenitor. Instead of hoarding this soul all to himself, he splits it up and distributes it amongst all of humanity. But the humans don't get involved just yet. Instead, they let the lords have their war against the dragons. The lords team up with Seath the Scaleless, the only one of his race who doesn't possess the immortality-giving scales of his brethren. He tells them that the secret of killing the dragons is to peel their scales off using lightning magic, because this game uses the anti-Pokemon logic. Once the dragons are defeated, the world enters an age of fire, in which humanity is tricked into forgetting the circumstances of the past. As the fire begins to fade though, a curse forms around the now numerous human population. The dead begin to return to life in a state known as hollowing. If one dies too many times, all vestiges of their humanity leave them, and they become empty shells, making up the majority of the enemies in the game as they mindlessly roam the world, patrolling the areas where they spent their lives. As they can no longer be killed, Gwyn instructs his family to round up these hollows and keep them in a asylums to await the end of the world, while he leaves to try and link the fire. Essentially feed his soul to it in an attempt to keep it burning and push back the Age of Dark. We awaken in the northernmost Undead Asylum, alone in a cell, surrounded by others who have already lost all sense of humanity, on the brink of hollowing ourselves, when an opportunity presents itself. Thanks, Oscar! The Souls games have a bit of a problem when it comes to tutorials, and by problem, I mean that they're shite. The direct way in which the devs just tell you the controls and subsequently lead you to the end is completely antithetical to the design philosophy of the series. But at this stage, they're accepted as a bit of a necessary evil, and to be fair to the Undead Asylum, this is probably the best of the trilogy. Although the level is mostly linear, it is a microcosm of the entire game and what to expect, and not just from a gameplay perspective. The first things that you'll notice in your cell are the two obvious glowy objects, the blue item and the orange developer message. And oh look, they don't even have to tell you to use less stick to walk. It's already less hand-holdy than like 90% of fucking games these days. Truly. This is the Dark Souls of tutorials. The first hallways that you make your way down teach you the basics of how to attack and lock on, but very quickly you're going to want to forget all of that as this guy appears. Every class starts with the terrible broken sword, so if you miss the message telling you to run away, you're gonna have a bad time. Luckily, the bonfire is just outside. Even this, though, is a valuable lesson to learn about the game. If you're getting your ass handed to you, you need to go somewhere else and do something that you can handle right now. Once you realize you need to head out this side door, you get to grab your shield and weapon, which changes depending on what class you chose. The placement of your sword and shield on this long corridor with this archer at the end of it actually kind of makes me think that this isn't your first escape attempt. Another super #relatable teaching moment comes as you round this corner and up these stairs. Fuck! Okay, lesson number 2. Look up when ascending stairs. It's a good lesson for anybody. The door at the top is locked though, forcing you back down and leading your eye naturally to the place where the boulder opened a hole in the wall behind you. Inside is Oscar lying on the ground with the dying wish that you escape the asylum. But how did he get in here, and who attacked him? This room is empty. The light shaft should be a good indicator. Like most things in this game, it isn't just there arbitrarily. You just need to be paying attention. At the beginning, Oscar is seen throwing the corpse with the key down to you from the roof. If you're observant, looking up in the main hall, seriously, looking up is going to become a really big theme in this video. It reveals that the Asylum Demon is prowling around up there. And then finally, you see a defeated Oscar surrounded by rubble in a room with no entrance and a single hole in the roof. Did Dark Souls just tell an entire ass mini-story without having to cut away or take control of your character to make sure that you saw this? You can just totally miss all of this if you want. Miyazaki does not give a fuck. But Dark Souls just told you twice to pay attention to details in the environment or you're gonna miss out, or worse. Before he dies, Oscar tells you about the prophecy of the chosen undead, which is why he's been skulking around on the roof, letting random undead out, hoping that one of them is the chosen one. He then gives you the iconic Estus flask and the key to the door and perishes. But as we all know, people don't stay dead in this world forever. Heading up the stairs, you'll find the final item for your class if you picked someone with spellcasting focus or a bow, and then you see the fog gate. Moving into this side room teaches you how to parry, and it presents you with a locked door, with seemingly no way to open it. This is the first indication that you're going to be returning to the Undead Asylum at some point. So you've explored as much as you can, maybe you've farmed some souls, but now it's time for the showdown. And in an uncommon act of generosity, the devs basically give you a free hit on this guy. You plunge down, turning the tables from before, but as you land, you now realize that you have to face this thing for real. The Asylum Demon is a perfect first boss to put into Dark Souls because it teaches the player the most important lesson that you need to know. Just keep your cool. It will die. You've already ran from him before, maybe you even tried to hit him and saw how little damage your weapon did. This places him in your mind as being far more of a threat than he actually is. He's big and his weapons swing around, causing parts of the environment to explode while the music blares a gothic cacophony at you. But here's the big secret, guys. The Asylum Demon is not a difficult boss. His attacks are telegraphed like 6 weeks in advance, he does very little damage, and he starts at nearly half health from the plunging attack. The Asylum Demon is not difficult, he's intimidating. And feeling intimidated and scared is something anyone can overcome and has nothing to do with mechanical challenge. You eventually persevere, defeating the demon, earning a decent chunk of souls, and claiming the Pilgrim's Key. As an area, the Asylum is a pretty good starting location. It sets up the tone of what to expect from the rest of the game, and it teaches you pretty much everything you need to know, whether that be overtly or intrinsically. However, like all Dark Souls tutorials, it is a little bit hand-holdy, and it doesn't let you discover as much as I would like. As a first boss though, the Asylum Demon is right up there. He's not difficult, but the way in which he's presented is everything that makes him challenging, and for that, I'm going to put him right here on the tier list. It's now off to Lordran to begin this quest and embody the chosen undead. Ooh, pretty bird. Welcome to your new home for the next while. Even to this day, about 7 years or so since I first played Dark Souls, the warm feeling that I get when entering the safety of Firelink is hard to describe. It pricks at the same kind of emotion you get from looking at a piece of evocative art depicting everyday life. It's familiar, yet stirring. You're dropped off by your crow friend and you get a message telling you to level at the bonfire. This bonfire fills your Estus up to 10 rather than 5 because this bonfire is attended to by a fire keeper. Right under here you can find the poor maiden, imprisoned and dumb-stricken, but bound by her duty to keep the bonfire sustained. It's truly hard not to feel sorry for her. Anyway, you can force her to upgrade your Estus flask by using the souls of her dead sisters. At Firelink, you'll meet this cheery fellow.
Well, what do we have here? You must be a new arrival.
Dubbed the Crestfallen Warrior, fans speculate that he's a bit of a meta joke, representing the players who eventually give up and resign themselves to going hollow, forsaking the idea that they are actually the chosen undead. He appears in all the Souls games, even Demon Souls, and he gives you general tips on where you should be headed next. But in true Dark Souls fashion, he's not going to give you a quest marker or even succinct directions. He claims that you need to ring the 2 bells of awakening, one of which is up in the Undead Parish, and the other is below in... What the fuck? Okay, never mind. So, up and down are all we gotta go with here. The citizens of Morrowind would have a tough time finding these places, which is probably why one of the most asked questions on Dark Souls forums from new players is, where do I go after Firelink? Firelink directly branches off into a ton of different places. From the beginning, right now, if you have the Master Key, you can get to the Undead Berg, the Catacombs, New Londo, and the Valley of the Drakes, and later you open up shortcuts to most of Lordran. The correct path is to head up these stairs here to the Undead Berg, following the Crestfallen Warrior's advice. This is why it's so funny that so many people end up getting stuck in the graveyard because they didn't learn the crucial fucking lesson of looking up. I personally believe that the graveyard was put here to trick players and once again teach them that you need to explore in order to survive. On my first playthrough, I completely missed these steps up and it took me a little longer than I want to admit before I found my way. The graveyard, on the other hand, is right in most players' eye line and it's very easily accessible. Experienced players, though, can make a mad dash through the graveyard for some pretty sweet early game items, including the binoculars, which are going to become useful later, for reasons, and the overcompensator here, which I'm going to be using for most of this run. Before you leave, you could round up all the items around the shrine and you can learn some miracles and a gesture from Petrus here. More like Pet Sus, am I right, guys? Once you finish your business, it's time to head to the Berg. The streets of the Undead Berg are empty and run down. The whole town is built on multiple layers and creates a feeling of claustrophobia, almost modelling the favelas of Brazil. As you walk past broken doors and ransacked homes, you start to wonder what kind of horrors occurred here and where all the people are. The only things still roaming are the hollowed bodies of what appears to be the guards or the army, doing the only thing they remember they're supposed to, patrol and attack other undead. There's a couple of branching paths in this area, but eventually you'll make it to this bridge, where From decide to give you a fucking heart attack. After this, you can head up to the stairs with your sights set on this archer firing at you from his cover up here. Again, the ingenuity of Dark Souls level design shines through. You want to get to that guy and kill him as soon as possible, and in doing so, you're more than likely to see the bonfire in the room just to your left here. Replaying the game, this short section from Firelink to the Undead Berg bonfire isn't that difficult, but on your first playthrough, it can seem like a massive distance as you inch your way through, and the Drake only puts you more on edge. So the feeling of relief when you get to the checkpoint and you can bank your souls is incredible. After you've leveled up a bit more, you can head back to the branching path that you skipped, this time with the upper hand as you tackle the enemies from the high ground. Down here you can find the undead merchant, who is in a sitting position so as not to appear threatening. And Dark Souls just provided yet another valuable lesson. Not everybody is an enemy. This cheery fellow actually sells one of the most unique items in the game, the orange soapstone. You've probably noticed these strange orange symbols littered around the floor, and unlike the ones in the Undead Asylum, these ones are left by other players, allowing you to use simple words and phrases to tell people of hidden treasures or dangers. When From Software closes a door, they open a window. Yes, the game is incredibly difficult, but they expected people to help each other in this communal way, and the messaging system, although it is limited in what you can tell other people, is a great way for players to help each other in what is otherwise a purely single-player experience. There's also a miracle in the game known as guidance, which shows more of the developer-left messages, but they only give very simple hints such as what a certain boss might be weak to, and never exactly where to go. This next stretch can be difficult for people as you're often dealing with multiple melee threats as well as ranged attacks. You need to pick your spots well and keep moving. As you ascend the stairs, you better have learned your lesson about looking up, because it's flaming fucking barrel time! Okay, so you've made it past all the guards, you might have used up a good portion of your healing abilities, and there's a fog gate right in front of you. And guys, this next part, guys, is so fucking genius! It makes me want to fucking puke. God, I love it. This boss fight is the culmination of everything you've learned up until this point, and it happens in 3 stages. Stage 1. Going in blind. You make your way onto the bridge, no enemies in sight. It's quiet. Too quiet. You cautiously move forward and hear the thwack of a bolt be loosed from a crossbow behind you. Maybe you don't hear it and instead you take the damage, but this alerts you to turn around. You scale the tower and defeat the enemies before heading back to the bridge. That was far too easy. Suddenly the music comes crashing in, and if you haven't finally learned to fucking look up, this guy is gonna wreck your shit. You panic, attempt to fight him on the bridge, and very quickly succumb to his attacks and the lack of maneuverability from his large size and the tight arena. You respawn back at the bonfire with the daunting challenge of attempting the boss run again, your hard-earned souls out there somewhere. Stage 2! Choose your battlefield. This time you head in and immediately make your way to the archers, making quick work of them. And then it dawns on you, this large, circular area is actually a much better place to fight that hulking beast. You descend onto the bridge and inch closer until the fight triggers. This time you're ready though. You sprint back, climb the ladder, narrowly avoiding his attack, and wait at the top for him to come after you. Now the odds seem a little bit more even, and you can tackle him more like a conventional boss. But the arena is still fairly precarious, and his attacks deal a huge amount of damage with very few chances to heal. Once again, you're bested, but this seems like the intended way to fight this guy, so you take a couple more tries at it. You can feel yourself going hollow with every defeat, followed by a brutal boss run back just to give it another futile attempt. Stage 3! Synthesis. You're sure this is it. You've come close a few times now and you think you have the timing just right. You kill the archers, you trigger the boss, climb the tower and look over the edge waiting for this ugly bastard to jump up again. This is the most frustrating part because he seems to take forever to come after you, but then it clicks. Way back in the asylum. Everything you've learned from the attack patterns to reading the environment and drawing inspiration from your previous experiences culminates as you plummet off the tower and carve out a massive chunk of his health bar. You repeat this twice more, leading him up and down the bridge, the gate of his attack now burned into your brain as you masterfully dodge each massive swing. On the third leap of fate, you prevail. The music fades and you're left with the message confirming your success and the first real sense of accomplishment. You can do anything now! Dark Souls, I guess. Okay, the bridge Drake thing, the Bridge Drake incident, the Bridge Drake kerfuffle, is one of the biggest pieces of criticism that players have for the early sections of the game, and I get it. If you didn't kindle the bonfire in Undead Berg, there's a really good chance that you're now low on Estus and health, and are carrying all the souls you got from the boss and the numerous boss runs that you did, which can be a lot. The Drake's attack doesn't do a crazy amount of damage, but it's totally possible for it to kill you. This, mixed with the fact that the attack itself isn't very well telegraphed, can be soul crushing if it catches you off guard. I understand the reasoning behind this. They wanted to create tension, even though you'll probably prevail in getting back to your souls if you've done the boss run multiple times, but I feel like this sends the wrong message to the player. The design philosophy of the game is to reward you for increasing the skills that are required for the game: quick reflexes, being observant, and patience. This feels more like a punishment for having finally bested the previous boss. It's also really the only event like this in the entire game. Anyway, it is what it is, and you're only ever going to get caught off guard by it once. Making your way back to the bridge, looking to the right this time, you can see a lone fellow staring off at the sun in the distance. Anyone who knows anything about Dark Souls, even tangentially through memes, will know that this is Solaire, the Sunbro himself, arbiter of the multiplayer summoning system in this game, and just all-round good guy. Talking to him and accepting his premises, he will give you a very important item, the White Soapstone, an item which is essential for participating in the game's multiplayer summoning system. For every article bemoaning the fact that Souls games don't have an easy mode, there's 1,000 people in the comments all crying out with the same response. Multiplayer on NPC summoning is the easy mode. Stupid. When you're not in hollow form, you'll occasionally see these white markers on the ground throughout the world. These are the summon signs of other players and sometimes NPCs that From Software have placed into the world to provide a helping hand to people who are stuck. One of the limitations of this is, of course, that you need humanity, which is uncommon in the early game. But if you're stuck for humanity, you can use the White Soapstone that Solaire gave you to put down your own summon sign and help another poor helpless player in their own world. Helping another player defeat the boss in their own realm will give you a humanity and some much needed experience with the boss's moveset. Some of the toughest fights in the entire game can become trivial cakewalks with just the addition of a second player to distract and soak up damage. And like with most things in Dark Souls, there's a lore explanation given as to how this is possible. Solaire mentions that the flow of time has become convoluted and that heroes both past and present are constantly phasing in and out of each other's realities. This makes total sense with the cyclical nature of the lore. Essentially, the events of Dark Souls play out over and over again in a cycle of fire and darkness. Every individual's playthrough is just another chosen undead on another cycle with slight variations each time, and occasionally those chosen undead can break through into other realities. The exact mechanics of this are a bit murky and are never really explained thoroughly, but they still at least attempted to explain it. Okay. Back to the parish. When you do eventually get past the Drake, you descend these stairs and are hit with a familiar sight. By knocking down this ladder, you open up a shortcut back to the bonfire in Undead Berg. Suddenly, the world around you that felt disparate starts to line up in your mind. The vertical nature of the area makes you lose track of your place in the world as you wind around in a spiral, only for it to all click right back into place as you descend back to where you started. Everyone knows about this shortcut now, but when the game was new, or for players going in blind, this is where the messaging system comes into play heavily. Before we move on, we're going to put the Taurus Demon right here on the tier list because he teaches you so much about not only the game, but about the skills that you're going to need to progress. It's just a shame that they kind of pull the rug out from under you right afterwards when the Drake kills you. Well, it doesn't always kill you, but it killed me. I feel bad about it. The next section can be approached in two ways, heading from the safety of the underbridge along the sewers into the Undead Parish, or by charging the dragon, which is faster and gives you access to a much more convenient bonfire, as well as the Sunbro Covenant. The underbridge is the far more treacherous and time-consuming option, as you have to deal with multiple hollows on narrow walkways, as well as these rats who can poison you, effectively ending your run. Whichever way you want to go, you'll eventually make it to this open courtyard with the church that you're looking for just past in the distance. At first glance, this might seem like a pretty straightforward section. Charging in head first is certain death, but there is a reward for the bold-hearted. As you enter this area, one of the hollows in the back starts to make a break for the portcullis, and you can see this happen if you're observant enough. If you're quick, it's possible to stop this hollow from closing the gate, cutting out a huge section of this area. Now, it's not something that most people would be able to react to in time on their first playthrough, but it's a massive time saver in New Game Plus or subsequent runs. For this video though, I'm heading down the pleb way. But first it's time to take out these enemies. Wait a second, where's that music coming from? After we vow never to speak of that again, it's time to head into the dank cellar. You can pick up this key and make your way up the various ladders until you end up on these walkways, with the courtyard you just came from below. These early sections do a great job of making the entire world feel like a real place. You'll spend long sections getting turned around, ascending and descending into various places, only to find yourself peering out on a place that you've been from a place you probably noticed earlier. Although the game has set paths, it never feels like a linear experience. But it also doesn't fall into the traps that a lot of open world games or sandbox games have of not being able to curate the experience for the player. I think the term interconnected, which many people use, is the best way to describe it, and that concept is about to come to fruition in just a moment. As you continue forward along the narrow ramparts, circling around to the church, the enemies get stronger, as the Balder Knights are now introduced and the regular Grunt Hollows are replaced by these shield fighters. Clearing out the enemies in the courtyard, the player messages here will often tell you to head down this narrow walkway and into this building. And once inside, you hear a sound that probably terrified you to your very core the first time you played this game. After taking so long and having to fight through many enemies and probably redoing that underbridge section a number of times, you're told of the safety of a bonfire nearby, but the clanging of metal does everything it can to unsettle you. Thankfully, descending down just one level of stairs, you will find the bonfire and the relative safety, but the curious among you will want to continue further to find the source of this beating. And the cautious among you will be rewarded by finding the first blacksmith in the game, Andre. As I said at the beginning, this game is far more build focused than class focused, and part of your build is your equipment. You can level up both your weapons and your armor using various different types of Titanite. Regular old Titanite will level up your normal weapons, and white Titanite will level up your divine weapons, and green Titanite will level up your flame weapons for some reason. Meeting Andre for the first time can be quite an unsettling experience, especially if you're a little bit too trigger happy and decide to attack him on sight. He can be pretty brutal to fight, and killing him removes him from the game entirely, meaning that you're shit out of luck if you need to upgrade your weapons for a decent portion of the game. I actually think this is why they made him such a challenging fight, to discourage you from actually trying to take him out. Anyway, after you've rested, leveled up, and maybe upgraded your equipment a little bit, it's time to head into the church. Inside you find the Black Tower Shield Knight, another mini-boss like the boar back in the courtyard. Mini-bosses don't actually respawn when you die, so it's pretty beneficial for you to take him out now. You also find the Soul of a Firekeeper here, which you can use to upgrade your Estus Flask when you somehow get back to Firelink, which may be sooner than you think. Once the church is cleared out, you'll often find a bunch of player messages telling you to go into these elevators over here. And this is the moment when Dark Souls, at least for me, became a masterpiece in level design. Hidetaki Miyazaki is the master of the reveal. He understands more than most other game designers that games need an ebb and a flow. His games are structured like music, creating long sections of rising tension followed by quick moments of release. In music, this is called the cadence between two different notes or chords, where a progression will build tension through its use of dissonance, only for it to finally resolve in an instant when the last chord is played and the ear receives the notes that it's expecting, or not, depending on what you wish to do. The moment that you realize where this lift is taking you is a perfect cadence. Firelink. Home. You've come so far, scaled your way to the top of the Undead Berg, defeated the Taurus Demon, tangoed with the Bridge Drake and mostly survived, and have now come full circle. This is the moment that Lordran becomes a living, breathing place, and not just a bunch of areas linked together. You start to notice the relationship between everything. The dilapidated ruins of Firelink Shrine now make much more sense, and it seems they used to belong to the basement of the Undead Church. The scope of the world around you has now forever changed in your mind. And it also provides a free kindled bonfire for the challenge up ahead, and hey, that's free real estate. Heading back up the elevator this time, you take the stairs up and fight the Balder Knight. Past him is the room full of hollows and the channeler, and I don't quite know why this guy is here. His ranged attacks can't really hit you when you're down below, and this power-up thing that he does to the hollows is the only time an effect like this actually happens. Before heading up to the boss fight though, we gotta go let this gentleman out of jail. Nothing bad could possibly come of this. A quick fact about this area, and I'm sure most fans of the game will know this, but for everybody else, as you walk through the Undead Berg and the Parish, you'll occasionally hear a bell sounding off in the distance. This occurs when another player rings the bell in their own game, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear it chiming away on a regular basis as I played through the section after all these years. With all that said and done, it's now time to ascend to the bell tower and ring the first bell of awakening, our ultimate goal for being in the parish. But of course, it's not going to be that easy, and we have to defeat the boss of this area, the Bell Gargoyle. The Gargoyle is a bombastic fight, as he's the first enemy who can get high above you and easily break your lock on. He only has a couple of moves to learn though, and once you get the feeling for his attacks, he's fairly easy to— Wait, what? Did I say the Bell Gargoyle earlier? Because I meant Gargoyles. Halfway through the fight, this second scaly boy enters the fray, turning a tough but manageable fight into a 2-on-1 slugfest. Suddenly, the window of opportunity to attack and heal becomes much narrower, and your positioning is much harder to judge. The game just showed you that not only will you sometimes be outnumbered in boss fights, but that some boss encounters will change as the fight goes on. A direct parallel to a fight that's coming up later that you probably all know about. If you keep on having trouble with the Gargoyles, good old Solaire is a very competent partner to have with you in the fight. His lightning attacks do crazy amounts of damage to the stone skin of the Gargoyles, because again, this game uses the anti-Pokemon logic. When number 2 pops up, this time the odds are very much evened. Now you can focus on taking these guys out mono a mono. Or you can just wait for them to gang up on Solaire and then take pot shots from behind. Whatever, either way, you will eventually prevail. You climb the tower, seeing out over all that you have conquered so far, and ring the bell, which will echo across time, giving hope to those still on their own journeys. The Gargoyles is a fantastic fight because it shows you a bunch of mechanics that are going to come up later in the game without really spoiling it for you or making it seem like the future endeavors are easy in comparison. From Software is being a little bit generous here. The second Gargoyle shows up halfway through the fight, but he also only has half of his health left. But the moveset does change, which mixes up the fight in the middle. The first time you fight these guys is definitely a special experience, but the second time you can be more prepared, and if you need to, you can always summon Solaire outside. Overall, the Gargoyles are a great first bell fight, and I think that they actually do a better job of preparing you for the later game than Qualaag does. So, for their challenge and for the way that they set up some things you're going to encounter in the later game, I'm going to give them an A on the tier list. Right after ringing the bell, you head down and meet Oswald the Pardoner, one of the most important NPCs in the entire game. This guy is a godsend for any player who may have accidentally aggroed an NPC that they need, such as a certain dazzlingly handsome blacksmith perhaps? By absolving you of your sins, the NPC will now interact with you again as normal, but he can't bring dead people back to life. He can also cure one of the most punishing ailments in the game, but we're getting ahead of ourselves here. And the last gift that he gives you is the Wild Pie emote, and then it's time to homeward bone out of here. The next route through the game is easily one of the most asked questions in Dark Souls forums, and for good reason. The key you need to advance to the next area is in a very silly place. Remember way back to the fight with the piggy? Yep, that one. Well, behind the portcullis there's a key to bring you down to the lower Undead Berg, where the undead peasants live. But From Software really dropped the ball in guiding the player to where the key is. First of all, as we already discussed, the front entrance is kind of a no-go unless you know to make a break for it before the gate closes. When you approach the bridge, there is this small route that you can take that leads off to the side, which doesn't really invite you to go that way when the objective is right in sight. And finally, after defeating the gargoyle bosses, you're given an elevator down to Firelink. That and the fact that from the church, the courtyard is surrounded by Balder Knights will probably dissuade a lot of people from going that way. Now, I know that the game is about exploring, but I feel like the placement of this item just doesn't make any sense, and not enough is done to lead the player here naturally. Anyway, once you have it, reading the item description makes it easy to figure out where to use it. Before descending into the village below, heading up these stairs will open a shortcut back out onto the Undead Berg. This makes 3 sections of the game revolve around this single bonfire as a checkpoint without ever feeling like you're actually backtracking. And unlike in future games where shortcuts like these appear in otherwise disconnected areas, this is a smaller section of a much larger world that continues to just loop further and further away from the safety of Firelink. The lower Undead Berg is fairly straightforward. The main street is guarded by the dogs, who I feel are almost ahead of their time in this game. The dog attack pattern hasn't really changed throughout the 3 games, but the clunkiness of Dark Souls controls makes them the most frustrating to fight in this entry in particular. If you bought the Residence Key from the Undead Merchant, you can free Griggs of Vinheim from whatever barrel-related bondage mishap he finds himself in. Once again, the player tips that are commonly left here do a great job of warning us of this incoming ambush. The rest of the path to the boss is just a straightforward line with the occasional spoopy ninja popping out. At the end, you find a fog gate and a branching path to the right, but following it will lead you to a shortcut back to Firelink on one side and a locked door on the other. I guess it's time to head through the I'm dead already? Okay. As opposed to the first two bosses in the game proper, who all have an optional way to make the fight easier, either by summoning or careful planning, there's only one way to reasonably kill this guy. Even the most hardcore get good scrub veteran won't judge you for cheesing this boss in whichever way you feel like. Although they're probably already mocking you for not using the new Londo shortcut anyway, but that's a whole other thing, we'll get back to that later. Walking into this fight for the first time can be one of the most disheartening experiences in the game so far. Traversing through the fog gate, it can take half a second after you become vulnerable to damage before the camera even decides whether it's going to follow you in. Even it knows how cursed this fucking fight is. You're immediately charged by two dogs who can quickly stun lock you, giving this cheery fellow over here just enough time to cleave you in half. And you finally get your first proper glimpse of the boss arena as you spin the camera around before the screen fades to black. Thankfully, there's a bunch of ways to totally cheese this fight and to even avoid having it entirely. The most common way people approach this fight is to quickly run up the stairs in the back. This forces the enemies to attack you one at a time, and once the dogs are dead, the demon will attempt to make its way up the stairs. If you jump off right before he gets to you, he'll also jump down, giving you a second to land a hit or two while his landing animation plays out before running back up the stairs and repeating until he's dead. And then there's the shit slinging method. There's an item called a dung pie, which is literally what it seems.
Eat my shit.
You can stand outside the boss arena and literally fling piles of shit over the wall until the guy can't take it no more. Technically, you can use any lobbed item like a firebomb, but there is something satisfying about killing this absolute fucking cunt of a boss with piles of sewer dwellers' feces. Regardless of how you choose to deal with him, he'll drop the key to the depths so you can find out where all those shit projectiles are actually coming from. The depths are a labyrinthian collection of corridors and small passages designed to confuse the player. This is the part where many players start to feel a sense of despair as the gloomy, oppressive darkness, low ceilings and squalid aesthetic make this quite a hard area to traverse. The entire section itself isn't really that large, but the winding nature of the walkways can make it hard to retrace your steps when looking for lost souls. The first part of the depths is the rush to the only bonfire in the area. You have to make your way through the kitchen, and if that name doesn't give you the heebie-jeebies, nothing will. Surrounded by a pack of wild dogs, two mini-bosses occupy this area, known as the Butchers. These lovely ladies toil away, cutting strips from some unknown meat to feed the denizens of the depths. Once they're taken out, you can roll through some barrels and free Laurentius, a pyromancer instructor who was seemingly being kept as live ingredients. He'll head back to Firelink to recoup and join the list of the soon-to-be hollows. Reading the player notes and heeding the warning to watch out for these slug creatures on the ceiling, it's a straight line to the bonfire and one of the more stressful areas. This level is home to some of the creepiest enemies in the game. The rats in this area scurry around in large groups and lash out at you violently. Interestingly, they have one of the highest drop rates for humanity in the entire game, which they procure from feasting on the corpses that fall down into the depths from the surface. In the center you find an oversized rat which seems to have trapped itself by gorging on bodies. But the rats are not the most dangerous thing you'll find down here. That honor goes to Dark Souls' most infamous enemy, the Basilisk. If you're playing online, you'll start to see statues resembling other adventurers contorted into painful positions. These are the remains of other players who have fallen victim to the Basilisk in their own world. Nowadays, people do know the danger that these goggly-eyed bastards pose, but for the first-time player, they can be absolutely devastating. Their main attacks involve spewing out this noxious-looking fog, which begins to fill up this bar down the bottom. First-timers could be forgiven for mistaking this for poison or bleeding, which are status effects that the player has seen at this point. But this effect is so much worse. Once the bar fills up, the player immediately dies and their characters turn to stone, becoming a warning sign for some poor fool in another world. You respawn back at the bonfire like normal, but you remain cursed. And while cursed, the player's maximum life is halved. You heard me right, you are now operating at half health. Now, you might think that this is a particularly brutal punishment, and it seems that From Software actually agrees with you. When you respawn right after being cursed, a very uncharacteristic message appears explaining the terms of this new hell that you find yourself in, as well as directly telling you where to go and how to cure it. Clearly, the devs thought that forcing you to run around like a headless chicken with zero clues as to how to fix this was too much to ask, especially if the player very wrongly assumes that the cure is further into the depths or beyond. But even more telling is that this is one of the few things that From Software actually nerfed for being too harsh. Before patch 1.05, the curse status ailment used to stack, meaning that you could end up with a total of 1/8 of your total health. This could end up being a game-ending problem for players, as trying to get out of the depths and save up enough souls to pay to have the status removed could become next to impossible. This original intention for how the curse mechanic worked is probably the reason for why this area's boss encounter is so easy. Okay, you know what? We're just gonna say it now and get it out of the way. It looks like a giant with teeth. But apart from being a literal Freudian nightmare, the boss itself is actually very easy. Just like with the real you just need good timing to pick your shots right and to try to avoid the acidic spray that comes out of it without falling off the combat zone. After a while of leading it around and wailing on it from behind, it will succumb, giving you the key to... Seriously, is that ever going to stop happening? But before you go, don't forget to stop by and chat with my very own Irish namesake, Donal of Zena. How are you fucking doing, bye? I do find it hilarious that they gave him probably the most Irish name of all time and then decided to make him Welsh, which is objectively the worst form of Gaelic. He seems to have a proclivity for stealing from the dead, as he will sell you the armor of bosses that you've defeated in the game so far. He also sells crystal equipment, a class of weapon and armor with very high attack and defense stats, but which break easily and can only be repaired by upgrading them with very expensive materials. This is, of course, a reference to our very own famous Waterford crystal, which does not make good weapons or armor. Do not try it. Okay, finally we're here. So what is it? What are you so afraid to say? Oh no. Oh god, no. Oh god, no! Blighttown is probably the most infamous area of Dark Souls, and for good reason. When the game was first released, 7th gen consoles couldn't really handle how massive and cavernous it was, even with the green haze covering anything more than a few feet away. There are legends of people being able to get it to work on the original PC version, but those are total bullshit. This led to many players' experience of Blighttown being a hazy mess, struggling against the sometimes single-digit frame rate, suffering from toxic, not sure if the path that you're on is going to just be another dead end. All of these problems have earned Blighttown the honor of being probably the most dreaded area in Dark Souls 1. However, with the release of Dark Souls Remastered, the area now functions as intended, with all of those technical problems sorted out. And with a new sense of clarity, I think that Blighttown is one of the scariest, most daunting locations in the whole game, but this time for good reasons. Blighttown is the first area on the main path where getting out and back up to the safety of Firelink is a truly difficult task. The area itself is maze-like with interconnecting wooden structures that more often than not lead to dead ends or just sheer drops. Enemies can come from all sides, and overlooking a ladder or a ledge for too long means that you're going to be ambushed very quickly. Then there are the toxic dart blowers. If you didn't visit Darkroot Garden yet, or you didn't buy it from the undead merchant in the sewer pipe, then chances are high that you don't have any blooming purple moss, which means being hit by these guys is essentially a death sentence. Thankfully, they act like mini-bosses and don't respawn, so if you do get hit with the toxic effect, your best bet is to attempt a suicide run to kill the bastard and make your next attempt a little easier. Blighttown is the area of the game where you either give up or just zen out and accept that loss is going to be a part of the experience. If you keep worrying about your souls or your stats, you'll never get through. Only by letting go, focusing on the incremental progress through the swamp, will you eventually make it to the bottom. Unfortunately, the bottom section of Blighttown isn't much better, as it's covered in this poisonous sludge, and when you find the lower bonfire, you start to get a better picture of what's going on here. Sewer pipes, very alike the ones you just came from in the depths, are flooding this place with whatever refuse the rats didn't manage to get their teeth into. The key to Blighttown states that hollows were banished into the sewers to eke out an existence for themselves, but even they feared the denizens of Blighttown. Whether the toxic waste transformed the hollows in Blighttown, they were drawn there, or the swamp birthed the creatures itself, the things that inhabit it are twisted beyond repair. Perhaps this is a social commentary about the lowest strata of our society being cast down below, forced to live amongst the waste, only to be judged for becoming the things that we forced them to be. Honestly, it's kinda hard to think or care about that when these fatties are trying to pancake you with a boulder, I'm assuming to make you easier to eat. Just off the lower bonfire, if you're not hollow, you'll be invaded by Maneater Mildred, one of the butchers from the depths, who has descended into Blighttown to find some fresh meat. Like the other butchers, she's a cannibal, meaning that the name is not a euphemism. If you can defeat her, she actually appears as a potential summon for the upcoming boss encounter. Just head towards this giant opening and prepare for the strangest boner of your life. Qualaag is the guardian of the second bell and half of the final boss of No Nut November. 50% human, 50% Devil May Cry antagonist, 100% woman. Her mother, the Wicked Witch of West Izalith, tried to recreate the first flame, in turn creating the Chaos Flame and spawning forth the entire demon race in what many have now deemed a total rookie mistake. Her 3 daughters were also transformed into abominations, 2 becoming these weird half-spider creatures and the 3rd becoming a frumpy goth. Qualaag is a large, imposing and flashy boss. This can give the impression that she's quite tough, and panicking during the fight can lead to a quick death, especially from her grab attack. But if you can avoid the lava puddles that she leaves behind, it's really easy to stay at her side or back and get a few good hits in. Add Mildred Maneater to the fight and it's a breeze to get through, and after the ordeal of getting down here, you deserve a quick and easy tumble. After the witch falls, you can ring the second bell and a cutscene will play out of a gate opening somewhere in the world. Thankfully we've already seen this place just before Andre back in the Undead Parish, but how the fuck do we get out of here? Taking a left out of Qualaag's domain, you'll see a ladder and a number of lifts. This is your quick way out of this place, assuming you don't want to tackle all of Blighttown again, but in reverse this time. Whether you take the ladders or risk the dog-powered lifts, you'll eventually make it to the top and find a key to New Londo. Pushing further on, you'll end up in the Valley of the Drakes, into the New Londo Ruins, up this elevator, and then back to Firelink. Again. Fucking game design. But wait. What if this door could be accessed earlier? Despite everything that you've just gone through, the overwhelming preference for tackling Blighttown is actually in the reverse. Rather than trudging through Lower Undead Berg, the depths, and the upper and lower sections of Blighttown, you can instead head straight from the kindled bonfire at Firelink, down to the New Londo Ruins, enter the Valley of the Drakes using the Master Key, taking liberties with the ladders and lifts to get to the bottom of Blighttown as quickly as possible, kill Qualaag, ring the bell, and then homeward bone straight back to Firelink, no strings attached. This is what we call in the business a pro gamer move, but it's something that can be easily accomplished once you have the layout in your mind. This route to Qualaag is actually the way that most people recommend doing Blighttown full stop, and after finally getting to play through the game with the area fixed, I have to disagree. Blighttown is an excellent area whose reputation has been destroyed by its technical shortcomings. But I believe it does what it sets out to do, which is make you wish that you never came down here. The feelings of hopelessness as you burn through your last purple moss, hoping that this is the final dart blower, or the feeling of triumph being slowly stripped away as you try to figure out your escape route, makes Blighttown feel hopeless and oppressive. And I don't know if you've been paying attention, but that's kind of a major theme in this game. So if you haven't gone through Blighttown the intended way before, and you have the remaster, I implore you to give it another shot. Having said that, being forced to buy the remaster just to get Blighttown to work properly is its own problem, but we're going to talk about that at the end. First thing that you notice as you return to Firelink is that it's getting pretty crowded around here. The pyromancer and sorcerer you rescued will sell you spells from their respective disciplines. And sitting away from everybody under the aqueduct, you'll find the fake Irish fella meditating with his wares available for sale, and really anybody else you meet on your travels will probably pass through here. However, these NPCs don't always stick around forever, so you should really get whatever you need from them before it's too late. Otherwise, they might disappear to continue on their own personal missions. And this is the way in which Dark Souls handles its side questing. Without so much as a marker or a diary entry, you end up running into a number of other undead, each with their own goals. If you listen to them, you may be able to figure out where it is that they're headed to and meet them on the next leg of their journey. And what happens if you miss or fail a character's questline? Nothing really. You simply don't get to see the resolution to that story unfold, and like with most aspects of the game, you're left to fill in the blanks. Not that completing these narrative threads is any more encouraging. Most of the people that you encounter during your time in Lordran are on the verge of hollowing, with their current quest being the thing that is keeping them from losing their sense of humanity. This means that regardless of whether they succeed or fail at their objective, the end of that endeavor means the loss of hope and the eventual hollowing of the person involved. Let's take Laurentius as an example. He came from the Great Swamp, a place known for its pyromancy, and he heard that Izalith is the birthplace of such magic. Speaking to him normally allows you to upgrade your pyromancy glove and buy spells from him. But if you have a plus 10 pyromancy glove and you visit the swamp in Blighttown, you can find Quailana, the third frumpy goth daughter of the Witch of Izalith. If you return to Laurentius after speaking to her, you will inspire him to go to Blighttown and find the knowledge that he seeks. But upon going to look for him in the swamp, you find him hollowed. In his pursuit for knowledge, he ventured too far and became trapped in the swamp, eventually succumbing to the poison one too many times and hollowing. After killing him, his questline is complete. And what is your reward for following this quest through to the end? 1,000 souls and the loss of the main pyromancy vendor in the game. Dark Souls quests aren't objectives. They're not virtual boxes that need to be ticked to gain a certain completion ratio in the game, which is why they don't directly tie into any achievements, although sometimes finishing them is actually required to get certain items. They're there to tell you a story about the world and the people who reside in it. If you take interest in a character, you can follow them on their path, occasionally even helping them in their cause. But in a world where mindless undeath is simply an eventuality, these stories will always end in tragedy. The only variable is the time span. Upon returning to the surface, you'll notice that a new denizen has arrived at Firelink. You probably weren't focusing on it up until this point, but the Bells of Awakening were used to awaken something.
I am the primordial serpent, King Seeker Framt, close friend of the great Lord Gwyn.
And that something is pure nightmare fuel. Declaring himself as King Seeker Framt, a primordial serpent and friend of Lord Gwyn, he becomes the new shepherd to usher you along the right path. Framt, in no uncertain terms, tells you that you need to go to the dwelling place of the gods and find the Lord Vessel. He seems like a kooky character, but one that wants to help, and his awakening at the bells somehow ties him into the prophecy. For now, there's no real reason not to trust him. Before heading to Sens Fortress though, we need to make a quick stop back to where it all began. There are a couple of ways to figure out that you can return to the Asylum somehow. This is a place that From Software clearly wanted the community to help each other, but to be honest, I question how much of this could be gleaned from just the player messages in-game. Then again, when the game was originally released, there was still a very large culture of buying official guides in Japan for games, and the internet did the rest, I suppose. Anyway, after jumping off the Undead Parish elevator, rolling onto this architectural strut, walking up to the roof, and pretending to be an egg for a prolonged period of time, which would probably make most people give up, the bird eventually carries you back to the Asylum, which has changed ever so slightly. Having left the door open like the rude person that we are, it seems a number of torch-wielding hollows have taken up residency outside of the Asylum. As you step into the space where you first encountered the Asylum Demon, the floor collapses, causing you to lose health, which I'm not quite sure how I feel about. Future games, and even the fight against the Four Kings later on, all have a section where you fall for dramatic effect, but the game prevents you from taking any damage. Anyway, it's not a big deal, and once you get down here, you basically have to fight the Asylum Demon 2.0. Actually, he's more like 1.25. He's almost identical, except that now he's so thick, his ass can produce sonic booms that you have to run away from. You're fighting the arena itself more than the demon, but after one or two tries, you'll figure out the radius of his butt blasts. The most frustrating thing about this is that if you get caught off guard right after arriving in the Asylum and you die, you'll get booted back to Firelink, or even further. Now, I know lore-wise it makes sense that you come back at the bonfire, but just, I don't know, replay the animation of the crow dropping you off or something. We can fill in the blanks. Exploring the Asylum a second time, there isn't a whole lot to find. Behind the previously locked room, you'll find the rusted iron ring. Revisiting your cell, you come across a Black Knight guarding it. It seems that the Black Knights have caught wind of you escaping the Asylum and have sent one to check on you, who's stuck around to see if you'd return. Inside the cell, you find the Peculiar Doll, an object which grants you access to one of the truly easy to miss locations in the game, which we're going to come back to later. If you make your way back to the walkway where you got boulder blasted the first time, you'll find a now hollowed Oscar who attacks you on sight. Other than that, all that's left here really is Snuggly the Crow, a bird with a nest that you can trade items with by dropping them beside her and waiting. This is the only way to get certain items in the game, and it's a cool idea, but it's a little bit obtuse to find. And doesn't really make a lot of sense. I guess crows and birds in general have a little bit more meaning in Japanese culture than they do in the West. Returning to the Asylum is a cool experience, although it's not a super interesting place to explore. It doesn't really open up any new pathways, and the things you can find here aren't that great, but they did hide two very important items in the Peculiar Doll and the Rusted Ring, which is strange, especially considering the Rusted Iron Ring is so helpful for Blighttown. And then hiding an item in an optional area that gets you into another optional area. I can't tell if that's creative genius or just terrible planning. Although I do commend them for hiding certain things away with the knowledge that there are certain players out there who will never see these areas, because it does make it more special when you do find them holistically. Okay, next up we're heading to Darkroot Garden, which is out the other side of where we met Andre earlier. Killing this Titanite demon can be a bit of a pain, but he drops some useful stuff, and the bonfire is just outside, so you can take a couple of tries at him. Heading down the main path, you'll eventually hit a dead end and a bonfire behind an illusory wall. If you have 20,000 souls to just drop on a glorified key, then you can open this door, but we're gonna take the cheap and lazy way through, like I have been my entire life. Which is why I'm doing YouTube. We're gonna skip the garden for now and instead head into the Basin. Heading to the bottom of this ramp, you'll find a bonfire inside of a cave that's guarded by one of these silver knights, and this cave actually leads out to the far side of the Valley of the Drakes. Once again, the interconnectedness of Lordran becomes apparent, and that's not even all of it. Heading into the Basin proper, you'll find the entrance to this tower, which leads up to a place that you may be familiar— Oh! Shit, I just got pancaked. This stony exteriored man is Havel the Rock, one of Gwyn's elite knights, whose entire thing is that he fucking hates dragons. He wears dragon scales as armor, he uses a dragon's tooth as a weapon, and he even throws a tantrum when the other dragon, who also hates dragons, starts working for Gwyn. He's basically the Eren Yeager of this world. If you manage to defeat him, his ring massively increases your equipment load, which is super important while wielding the manhood projector here so I can still cartwheel around my enemies. And if you climb to the top of the tower, you'll find yourself in a very familiar place. The last noticeable thing in this area is the massive Hydra, which continuously shoots water blasts at you as you try to approach it. Once you get to the pool of water the Hydra resides in, he's actually not that hard to beat as long as you have the rusted iron ring from the Asylum. This ring allows you to walk through water without any impediment to your movement. The Hydra is a really easy mini-boss to beat, depending on his AI and how often it decides to do its stupid hydro pump attack while you're within 5 feet of it. Once he lashes out at you, you can attack one of his heads, which come off one by one as you damage the creature. Classic Hercules Hydra logic. As long as you don't fall straight off the face of the earth through this water, which impedes your movement, but apparently retains zero buoyancy, the Hydra will go down quite quickly. From here, there's a ladder leading upwards, which is the back way into Darkroot Garden, but there isn't really anything we need to do up there at the moment. But at the far end, we find a golden golem, which acts much like the ones we've seen before, who seems to be holding someone captive. When released, she reveals herself as Dusk and tells you she is from the past. Other than this though, she has very little to say and will be coming back to her soon also. Dark Souls has a great way of setting things up with these sort of innocuous encounters that eventually have amazing payoffs later on, especially if you happen to find them by yourself and not by using a guide or watching a video. Sens Fortress is the testing ground for those who are worthy to enter the realm of the gods in Anor Londo. It's a treacherous obstacle course full of swinging traps, perilous pitfalls, sharpshooting giants, and the weirdest spank bank material you will find in Lordran. It also acts as a kind of a DPS check before you head too far from the safety of Firelink and Andre the nice old blacksmith. If you're not dealing decent damage to these snake boys, you need an upgrade, or the enemies of Anor Londo are going to eat you alive. Dark Souls has never been much of a platforming heavy game, but there have always been moments. I think Sens Fortress is an example of platforming in a Dark Souls game done right. Instead of focusing on the very limited jump move, which you can perform by hitting the dodge button while sprinting, it places you onto these narrow walkways where you're forced to avoid dangerous obstacles and keep an eye on enemy attacks. Dark Souls is a game about timing and awareness, and that is what is being asked of you in Sens Fortress. After the walkways come the hallways of balls. The ballways, if you will. When you know the correct route to go, this can be quite an easy area to get through, but the first playthrough, as you run around panicking, praying you don't get run over and have to traverse those walkways again, can be quite daunting. It makes the moment when you reach the mechanism and gain control of the thing that has been impeding you this whole time all the more satisfying. Here we meet Sigvard of Katarina, better known as the Onion Knight. He seems to be stuck in the fortress himself, too far in to turn back, but not nimble enough to bypass the rolling stones. Once you deactivate the trap, you can return to him and continue his questline. The ball launching machine holds many secrets, however. Diverting the balls down a certain way will open a breakable wall, revealing a hidden room. Inside, we find the most powerful sorcery vendor in the game, Big Hat Logan, a man whose origin is both shrouded in mystery and protects his head from the sun. If you're not super well versed in the magic ways though, he'll straight up ignore you. The man's ego is almost as big as his namesake. Once freed from the cage, he'll head back to Firelink. Finally, you'll make it through the building into the roof, and you gotta move quickly. The giants who operated the gates at the front of the fortress are now hurling cannonballs at you, but you only really have a problem if you're not moving. There's a secret bonfire in this area, the only one in the entire level, which is a bit cruel considering that dying to the boss here without finding it means another trek through the entire fortress. Just around the corner we find an unusual encounter, a man known as Rickard the Archer. He's a one and done mini boss that drops one of the better rapiers in the game, the shittest of shit tier weapon types. Oh, thanks, I'll just jab everything to death. What am I, the CDC? It is now time to meet the final boss of Lower Lordran, the one who's meant to test your worth for entering the city of the gods themselves, the Iron Golemn. Golems play a very strange part in Dark Souls lore. They're used to guard the kiln in the second game, and the magic used to make them is something that's highly sought after. It's also mentioned that the magic used is owned by the giants in the second game, and it's interesting to note that Sens Fortress holds both the Iron Golemn and the only giants that you meet in the present day. So a large mass of souls went into making this thing to ensure that only the best make it to Anor Londo. As for the fight though, it's kind of a clunky mess. They tried to give you this big imposing boss on this very small precarious walkway, but 50% of the time, this motherfucker just falls straight off. Once defeated, your reward is to be manhandled by a bunch of bald flying demons that look like Johnny Sins, and it's off to Anor Londo with you. As a test to see if you can get into the fabled city of the gods Anor Londo, the Iron Golemn is not that impressive. Most of the time when he kills you, it'll be because you either fell off yourself or one of his massive attacks managed to just fling you off the side. But God help you if you didn't find that bonfire, because otherwise it's another sprint through the narrow walkways, ledges and catwalks of Sens Fortress, and that is worse than any boss in this entire game. Sens Fortress works on multiple levels. Thematically within the game, it's supposed to act as a place to test the Knights of Gwyn's army, and that is also what it's doing to the player, but it's supposed to make sure that you're ready for what awaits you in Anor Londo. The snake enemies are one step above what you fought before. They're just a little bit more tanky, you need a little bit more DPS output. The narrow walkways are there to make sure that you have the situational awareness and the motor skills that you're going to need once you get to the catwalks in Anor Londo. And the Iron Golemn is one final test of your positional awareness for when you have to fight the big bad duo that's coming up later, where positioning and timing are going to become absolutely critical. He's not the worst boss in the game, but he's definitely not really a standout either. I'd give him a D if it wasn't funny to watch him fall off the edge so many times, so we're going to put him as a C on the list. Arriving in Anor Londo for the first time is a real shock. Gone are the dreary grey ramshackle buildings of Lower Lordran. Instead, we're met with a grand paradise of ivory and marble coloured buildings being drenched in a warm glowing light. Suddenly the darkness of the lower levels makes sense. This massive city built on this mountain is literally blocking out the sun. Looking down from the wall you find yourself on, you immediately notice the grand scale of this area. There's a video by a channel called Shazez who unhook the camera from the player and go and explore this township off in the distance, and what they found was incredible. Most of these buildings that you can see are actually fully rendered 3D models, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description if you want to watch the whole thing. Making your way to the bonfire, you'll meet the Dark Moon Knight, the firekeeper for this area. This lady is tasked with keeping the flame of Anor Londo alive. Heading out the door and down this elevator, you find an old friend to fight. This is the first time the devs throw an old boss at you as a regular enemy, but unfortunately it is not the last. The Gargoyle mini-boss here is fine, and it's nice to get a second chance to get the unique item out of him, but just fighting him on his own isn't challenging, and he has a nasty habit of jumping off the edge, even though he clearly has wings and can fly. I don't know why he doesn't respawn or why he's here at all really, but whatever. This section is the second and final non-optional platforming part of the game. Again, the devs know how to use the mechanics to their advantage rather than putting in a bunch of dumb platforms you have to jump to with terrible jumping animations and timing. Instead, you're placed on these thin, narrow walkways with enemies that have much better mobility than you do. The AI can be tricked, but this section can still be quite hard, although I can't quite tell if it's fun. Once you make it out the other side, you now have access to the elevator and across to the cathedral. Unfortunately, the main door is locked, so like any good churchgoer, we're going to take the back way in. This means even more ledge crawling, this time contending with the Batwing demons, who for some reason can't use their wings to stop themselves from falling off the edge, just like the Gargoyle. Eventually though, you're going to run into the Anor Londo archers, the bane of many people's Dark Souls playthrough. And I'm going to spit hot truth right here, my friends, because this section isn't actually that hard. You'll get it after a couple of tries. The main problem with this section of Anor Londo is the bonfire placement. They decided to put it at the top of the elevator, which you have to wait for 50% of the time as you respawn. Then it's a long ass trek across this bridge. Basically, the run back to where you died is boring for how easy it is to die in a way that's not really based on a skill, or at least any skill that you've been taught up until this point. Once you get inside the cathedral proper, the area becomes more of a classic Dark Souls maze of winding corridors that eventually loop back to each other. This central corridor that you find yourself in will eventually lead to every part of the cathedral, but first it's time to meet back up with an old friend. You'll find non-Phantom Solaire waiting for you as you enter the side room, and he's being super duper awkward ooh-woo for some reason.
Do not hesitate to call upon me. You've left me with quite an impression. I would relish a chance to assist you.
Oh my god, just take me now! As you make your way through the various rooms and halls, you'll eventually find Siegmeyer contemplating how to defeat a room full of Silver Knights. If you head in and kill them all, he'll be utterly amazed, and his questline will continue from here, and you also get a new shortcut. The depths of the Anor Londo Cathedral contain all kinds of secrets that add to the speculative lore of the game. One of the most telling is finding Havel's weapon, the Dragon Tooth, hidden behind another illusory wall. But you find Havel's entire armor set in the basement alongside an occult club. Now, Havel's weapon of choice is a club, obviously, but the occult modifier in the lore of Dark Souls was created in order to kill the gods. So, did Havel stash his prized Dragon Tooth weapon away, then set out on a mission to kill the gods with the inferior bashing stick? Perhaps he failed and was struck down himself, only to go hollow and be sent to the tower in Darkroot Garden with cheap imitations of his gear. And that isn't the only interpretation of these facts, but like most things in Dark Souls, the actual answer is probably never going to be found out definitively. After clearing one final room, looting all the gear, and opening the final shortcut, you make your way into the main hall with an ominous looking fog gate to your right. Before heading in and fighting the Wonder Twins though, first you want to meet the Iron Smithing Giant. This is the second blacksmith in the game, and the only one who can turn those boss souls that you've been finding into usable weapons. Oh, you've been using them for souls? Well, better try again during New Game Plus. Okay, we've stalled enough. It's finally time to face the toughest challenge in the game so far. The dynamic duo, the big boys, the stuff of Dark Souls legend at this point. Ornstein and Smough have everything that make a fight challenging in Dark Souls. You have two hard-hitting enemies that work in tandem with each other, a cluttered fighting arena, a two-stage boss fight, and most importantly, a boss whose name is impossible to figure out how to pronounce just from the spelling of it. Smough? We'll go with Smough. The fight against these two behemoths is talked about all the time on Dark Souls related forums, message boards, and particularly nerdy workplace water coolers. For some, they are the greatest challenge the game has to offer, exceeding Artorias, Gwyn, and even Manus. It really depends on your skill level and what state your build is at when you encounter them. This fight can go on for an awfully long time because your window to attack is so low, especially if you're using a large weapon like I am with the Show or No Grower. I've fought Ornstein and Smough a bunch of times, and usually my strategy involves summoning Solaire and chucking a few fireballs at whoever isn't looking at me at the time. But for this video, I thought I should really solo them at least once to give my impression of the experience, and I wasn't expecting it to be this challenging until I changed how I was fighting. My strategy until this point was focused on having a very high equip load so that I could stay mobile while wearing okayish armor and wielding my weapon with the shield on the back for stamina regen. And when I got to Ornstein and Smough, I was able to easily evade attacks as my rolling was so quick, but trying to swing that big ass sword would usually end in me taking a hit from one of the two, and sometimes having my animation cancelled, meaning I wasn't pumping out any damage. After a bunch of attempts, there was two options. Go down the old dependable Solaire summon route, or mix things up. One way to get through this would be to go to the blacksmith and upgrade a new weapon with whatever resources I happen to have, and hope that that solved my problem, maybe even having to leave Anor Londo altogether to farm supplies. Not the best solution in all honesty. So instead, why not change my playstyle? By equipping Havel's armor set, I sacrificed mobility, but I gained enough protection and poise that even if I got hit mid-swing, I could still take a huge chunk of their health out with each hit. This didn't make the fight trivial by any means. Ornstein and Smough come at you hard. Ornstein, of course, is the more nimble fighter, and whenever you're trying to get a hit on Smough when you think he's just landed some massive attack that you can take advantage of, you'll get a side swipe from the spear. But do not be hit by Smough's hammer. It is not a good time. Both of them also imply lightning attacks, which makes sense considering that they helped Gwyn to fight the dragons. And then of course there is the iconic moment when you finally best one of them and the cutscene triggers. If you've been whittling away at both of their health bars at the same time, you're about to be in for quite a shock. Whichever one happens to survive engulfs the power or devours the power of their partner, becoming even stronger for the second half of the fight. And Smough is definitely the easiest of the two to deal with once he's powered up, because superpowered Ornstein, it's a tough fight. Not to say that either of them are particularly easy, and when I did manage to land that killing blow, I got this overwhelming sense of accomplishment that I haven't felt since my first playthrough of the series. By analysing the problem and the tools I currently had, I was able to overcome a challenge, but I still know there were many other ways that this could have been achieved. And this is the final lesson that Dark Souls taught me even after all these years. When you run up against a brick wall, or two, there's no shame in changing your strategy. There's a ton of elitism amongst Dark Souls fans because, of course there is. You give the nerds of the world a super challenging game and their dicks are going to be out ready for measuring within seconds. For the most part, this elitism is tongue-in-cheek. The vast majority of the time when someone utters the gamer motto of "get good," they're doing it at least semi-ironically. But there will always be people who want to show off and claim that their way is the most legitimate way to play the game. Even now, I can hear the people writing their angry comments when they found out that I was using the Zweihander like 20 minutes into this video, calling me a noob or whatever. But the fact is, that's not what Dark Souls is about. The Twitch streamer doing a perfect no-hit SL1 broken sword only speedrun whatever the fuck deserves just as much respect as the casual gamer who refused to quit and used every single trick in the book to eke out their way to the end and enjoyed every minute of it. Dark Souls is the great equalizer. If you persevere, you will finish it, and then you get to join that elite club of gamers who goad the next generation into getting good themselves. The only true failure is giving up and going hollow. Ooh, boobies. Anor Londo is a fantastic area, and I think the pinnacle of design in the entire game. The sheer juxtaposition between what you've seen up until now, going all the way down into Blighttown, into Sens Fortress, all of which are squalid locations, and then being presented with this regal, majestic looking city up in the sky is just fantastic. There are maybe a few too many platforming sections, but they can be forgiven. You can tell that an awfully long time went into perfecting the look and feel of Anor Londo, and it is easily one of my favorite areas in the game, if not my favorite. And of course, Ornstein and Smough are iconic in the Dark Souls universe now, with their boss fight being seen as the first true roadblock for many players. And because of this, I'm going to give the Ornstein and Smough fight the second highest rank, A. I'm reserving S for a little bit later on for a very special fight, which I really enjoyed, but the Ornstein and Smough fight I feel is the first great achievement in Dark Souls, and it propels you to the end of the game. It's no secret that the second half of Dark Souls is a bit underwhelming compared to what came before. There are a number of reasons for this, one of which is the commonly cited notion that the game was rushed out to meet deadlines, but the problem runs a bit deeper than that. Right after beating Ornstein and Smough, you ascend to meet Guinevere, Gwyn's only legitimate daughter. She confirms you as being the chosen undead and gives you access to the Lord Vessel. With this, you can now teleport to a number of locations, usually one of the central bonfires in an area, but not to any bonfire that you want. You do still need a working knowledge of the world's layout, but this leads to a very particular design for the rest of the game. Just like before, you'll be traveling further out from the safety of Firelink. However, this time, as you recede from your comfort zone, instead of striking out into the world only to find some clever way to loop back to the main hub, and expanding the scope of Lordran, each of the final areas conclude with a dead end, forcing you to teleport or backtrack to leave the area. Hence the inclusion of the Lord Vessel and the fast travel mechanic. This makes the later sections of the game feel kind of uninspired. Going on a one-way trip to Anor Londo, feeling isolated and disconnected from the rest of the world, worked so well because of how unusual it was. With each new area that sprouts out further from the central hub without connecting back, the world begins to feel more disjointed. But this isn't really the main reason why the latter half feels so lacking. The true problem is that Dark Souls has shown kind of everything it has to offer. By this point, you must have mastered the combat, you've shown mastery of the controls and the systems, and have defeated what some people would argue is the toughest boss encounter in the game. Because the final sections can be tackled in any order, the devs couldn't make any section radically more difficult than another, which is good news if you're falling behind a bit, but for anyone keeping up with their leveling and optimizing their build, it means that the game's difficulty is now on a downward slant. This is not to say that the second half of the game is bad by any means. The new areas are quite unique to look at and are full of lore, and that's without even talking about the higher level optional areas in the game and the DLC. But each section doesn't do much to innovate, and in some cases it relies heavily on gimmicks to keep the gameplay loop exciting. So for the next sections, I'll try to be a bit more brief, focusing on the aspects of each area that stand out rather than going through them in detail. And as we reach the halfway mark, we should probably check in on our game time for that speedrun attempt. Let's see, so we're at about 20 hours, okay, and the all-boss attempt right now is standing at... oh, it's quite a bit faster than that. Well, shit, okay. Now, a lot of people at this point would head over to Frampt and place the Lord Vessel in his name, effectively pledging to link the fire. There is another option, however, but it takes a bit of planning to set in motion, so first, we have to return to Darkroot Garden. First though, we have a very quick mini-boss to kill. Just down from the door that was sealed by Artorias' lock, you can find a little side passage, and after taking out a few giant suits of armor, you know, average day in the life of a Dark Souls protagonist, you'll arrive at the Moonlight Butterfly. This boss exists only to guard a fairly useful item, the Divine Ember, which allows you to upgrade weapons with a divine enchantment. You also get the key to the tower we found, Haviland, but with the master key, this is kind of irrelevant. The boss itself is incredibly easy. If you have any ranged capabilities whatsoever, just chuck a few spells at him and he'll drop. If you don't, From Software, very conveniently, placed an NPC nearby who can take him out in about 5 shots, as long as you can keep him alive that long. Either way, boss is easy peasy, and he makes me feel like a better player than I actually am, so A rank, next. Okay, time to get back on track. Either by paying the now much more manageable 20,000 souls, or heading in the back where you fought the Hydra and climbing the ladder, you can make your way into the garden. Now, I'm a frugal man, so let's go in the back way. Here you find these big cats called the Forest Guardians, mini-boss type creatures that don't respawn and never show up again. Once again, From Software shows incredible creativity in enemy design. In most games, a one-off creature like this would be a reskin of another enemy with a slightly different coat of paint. These guys are, for all intents and purposes, unique, or at least different enough from other enemies that it's hard to see the comparison. Once you're in Darkroot Garden, it actually becomes this large open space with just the trees to mark your way and disorientate you, and there's a bunch of items that you can find around here. Eventually you'll make it deeper into the forest with some structures off in the distance. To the right is the boss fight of this area, but first we're going to head left and meet one of the more interesting characters in the Dark Souls franchise, the cracked out wall kitten. Alvina is a cat, guardian of the forest, and probably the mother of those weird cat things that we murdered to get in here. Oops. Okay, she doesn't need to know about that. Alvina offers to let you join the Forest Watchers Covenant, one of the many covenants in the game. This one has a fairly unique mechanic, one that has been used a lot more in the sequels. After joining, you are given the Cat Covenant Ring, which, when worn, enters you into a PvP queue. Anyone who enters the forest who isn't currently an active member of the Covenant and isn't hollow can be invaded by someone currently in the queue. You will be randomly called upon while wearing the ring to take out these players, invading their worlds and hunting them down. It also stops a number of NPCs around the woods from attacking you, although you just need to be a Covenant member, not actually wearing the ring. This Covenant makes Darkroot Garden a much more dangerous place than it would be without it, and gives players this large open area with obstructed visuals to engage in a cat and mouse style of deathmatch. After all of our other business is taken care of, it's time to take out the boss of this area, Best Girl Sif. It is said that long ago, Sif and Artorias drove back the spread of the Abyss at the cost of Artorias' life. Although speaking to Alvina reveals that she has other theories. Sif now diligently guards the grave of her master against anyone else thinking of entering the Abyss. Sif fights with a giant sword in her mouth because sometimes I forget that this game is made by a Japanese studio. She's not particularly hard to beat, most of her attacks can be blocked and the rest are telegraphed like crazy. I'd give her a C on the boss tier list if not for one thing, but we won't be spoiling that just yet. Once she falls, you can go and collect Artorias' Ring of Abyss Walking, which allows you to be in the Abyss without instantly dying. Now we can go and head to the new Londo Ruins, located just below Firelink, and seek out the first of the 4 Lord Souls. There was once a great city known as New Londo, a perfect representation of the kind of world that Lord Gwyn wished to have, with a happy human population looked after by 4 kings. Gwyn bequeathed each of these kings with a fragment of the Lord's soul, giving them great power, but one day they turned to the dark, seemingly led astray by an ill-meaning serpent. The kings and their knights became dark wraiths, vile creatures who steal the humanity from others and allowed the abyss to seep into the city. Because of this, New Londo was flooded and the people sacrificed in order to stop the spread of the abyss. And they didn't even give them 2 weeks. The spirits of those killed in the flooding now haunt the ruins, attacking all who enter without discrimination. Upon entering, we run into an old friend. After returning from Anor Londo with the Lord Vessel, there can be no doubt that we are in fact the chosen undead. Because of this, the crestfallen warrior has lost all hope and retreated to New Londo in order to turn hollow. Upon seeing us again, just like with Oscar before him, he attacks on sight with no recognition of who we are, and a haunting reminder of what would have happened to you had you not been the chosen one. The New Londo Ruins is the first of the gimmicky areas in the game. The gimmick for New Londo is the ghost enemies, specters who move through walls and structures as well as avoid your attacks incorporeally, but you are unable to move through them. They can also fly and they have a nasty habit of attacking you through walls, floors, stairs, any part of the geometry really. There are 3 ways to hurt the ghost: using a cursed weapon, using a consumable item called a transient curse, or be cursed yourself. As in cursed. Remember cursed, as in 50% of your max health cursed. The best way to get through the area is to simply make a mad dash. It takes a few runs, but eventually you can just brute force it. The goal is to make it to the top of what appears to have once been a chapel and speak with Ingvard, the Guardian of the Seal. He is one of the sealers who was responsible for flooding New Londo. If you talk to him after obtaining the Lord Vessel, he will give you the key to drain the water, reopen the way to Lower Londo, and unseal the 4 kings. In Lower Londo, you will encounter the Dark Wraiths, remnants of the 4 Kings army. These guys are capable of performing Life Drain, a grab attack which sucks the liquid humanity right out of you. There is a trove of loot down here, but eventually you'll make it to the fog door and a spiral staircase downwards. However, following it will eventually lead to a dead end with nothing but the black void left to descend into. So it's time to put on Artorias' ring and head down into the abyss for the first time. Another contender for the toughest boss in the game. You thought that fighting 2 bosses at the same time was difficult? Try fighting 4 giant enemies whose weapons are even bigger than they are in a pitch black arena that makes it incredibly difficult to judge the distance between you and the enemy. There's 2 well-known strategies for taking them on. One is the same as any other boss: level up your range defense and stay away. The other is to boost your defense and poise as high as possible, get in close and just keep attacking. And you'd better hurry because taking too long causes the next king to spawn while you're still dealing with the first one. Ironically enough, you don't actually have to fight 4 of the kings to win the fight. The visual design for the 4 kings is absolutely fantastic. The crowns on their head and the elegant curves of their swords makes them imposingly regal. Mechanically though, I find the 4 kings to be one of the most frustrating to fight. Disorientating the player's sense of spatial awareness is a great idea, and they are easily the most imposing bosses in the game. But where the devs decided to place the floor of the area, i.e. at around the middle of their character model, makes them incredibly buggy. Dodging around them is nearly impossible, as their weapons swing behind them, and staying in too close for too long means you'll have a tough time dodging their homing magic attack. Unlike with Ornstein and Smough, where any playstyle is possible as long as you optimize it, the 4 Kings is prohibitively difficult for people with a light build and a quick melee weapon. There is a summon sign for Witch Beatrice outside, but you have to have already summoned her against the Moonlight Butterfly for it to appear. After finding a willing participant to help me with the fight, I eventually prevailed, but I'm gonna place the 4 Kings as about a B on the tier list. After the fight though, it's time to head off, but first, a quick meeting with the plot. After the king's fall, you'll gain a homeward bone so that you're able to get out of here, and you'll find a faint glow off in the distance. If you've placed the Lord Vessel before this, you'll be on your own in the darkness, but if your allegiances aren't set yet, there is another option. Hidden against the dark backdrop, another primordial serpent waits for the chosen undead who managed to face the abyss and live. This time, Darkstalker Kath tells you a different tale than the one everyone else seems to take for granted. According to this smiley snake, the fading of the flame is not the apocalyptic event that has been prophesied. Instead, it is the natural progression of the world, and the undead curse is actually a sign that humanity is returning to its natural state of a hollow being, like before the first flame erupted. He claims that Gwyn's attempt to prolong the Age of Fire is actually doing immense harm to the fabric of the world, which explains the timelines being so muddled. Whomever you decide to choose, you must simply ask them to bring you to Firelink Shrine, and they'll do so by, oh dear god, we're gonna be sick. What the fuck? Was there like a contest on DeviantArt to design these guys? Anyway, once you've finally placed the Lord Vessel, you can offer any of the Lord Souls you've acquired so far to it, but you need them all to open the path to the Kiln and Lord Gwyn. There is something incredibly satisfying about heading back to Firelink with the intention of taking on the graveyard as an appropriately leveled character this time. When you actually manage to get through, you realise that it's really not that far from Firelink to the entrance of the Catacombs, but when you're trying to make a mad dash with a bunch of skeletons attacking you all the time, it can seem pretty daunting. The Catacombs is a relic of the past, before the bodies of the dead would simply rise on their own. The skeletons that you fight here, although leaving souls behind upon death, aren't actually sentient beings. Instead, they're brought back by probably the most superfluous people in a world naturally filled with undead, the necromancers. Seriously, how is this not a saturated market? The only way to make sure the skeletons don't rise again after death is to defeat the nearby necromancer who acts as a mini-boss and won't respawn, or you can bonk them with the divine weapon. The Catacombs is essentially a 3-tier maze of dark caverns and even darker, narrow tunnels. As you make your way through, you have to find a number of levers that will give you access to these bridges, turning them the right way up. There is a bonfire to find about halfway through, but once all of the bridges are turned the right way, the fastest route to the boss is a straight downward vault from the main bonfire. There are a bunch of secrets to find here, including the possible tomb of one of Gwyn's children, but like with most things in Dark Souls,
there were rumors that there was a rumor. But that was just bullshit.
There's also an undead blacksmith, and finally, one of the most obtuse covenants to find. To get in, you have to find some of the covenant items, and then get into this coffin for about 30 seconds. Seriously, what is with this game and having you just curl up into a ball or a tight space for a prolonged period of time and just hope the player doesn't get bored and get out? Anyway, it doesn't matter. You will eventually be taken to the resting place of Nito the Spooky Boy, and here you can become a Gravelord servant, one of the more interesting covenants in the game. As a member, you have the option to use an Eye of Death to curse nearby players. This only affects people who are in New Game Plus and who are plus or minus 10% of your soul level, even if they're hollow. If cursed, stronger enemies taking on the form of black invading phantoms will appear in your world and make your life a living hell. The only way to stop it is to find the Gravelord summon sign, which allows you to Uno reverse card invade their world and kill them, lifting the curse for you and all others who are cursed by it. As the game gets older and more irrelevant, it feels like the only people playing anymore are doing it just to get through the story as soon as possible. There are events such as the return to Lordran once a year, but outside of these moments, the multiplayer focus covenants and aspects of the game are becoming harder and harder to engage with, which is sad. Adding it into the game was always going to make it a time relevant feature, and I'm glad that they included it in the first place, but we can still lament its passing. After you're done messing around with all the spooky skeletons, it's time to take on the derpiest boss in the game, Pinwheel. Pinwheel gets a lot of flack for being an easy boss, and it's true. By the time you make your way around to the Catacombs, he doesn't hit very hard and he goes down pretty quickly. But I don't think that Pinwheel is a weak boss, I think he's just misplaced. Most people steer clear of the Catacombs after getting their ass kicked in the graveyard at the start of the game. If you come down here after Anor Londo, you're gonna bulldoze straight through him. His fire attacks can actually do a decent amount of damage, and this split apart thing that he does where you have to try to find the right one, I've always liked that in video games, but by the time you get to this point, you usually have quite high fire resistance if you need to, and knocking out a couple of extra guys, it's just not a challenge. Now, if you had fought him right before the Bell Gargoyles, who knows, this might have been a very memorable fight. For your troubles for fighting the Master of Necromancers, you receive the Rite of Kindling. This item allows you to carry even more Estus than before. By offering a whopping 3 humanity to a bonfire, resting there will fill your flask up to 20 charges. Something you're going to want to do for the final few bosses in the game. It's a real shame that Pinwheel is such an underdeveloped boss at this stage in the game because the implied lore of the character is super interesting. He wears 3 masks, the mask of the father, mother and son, and he looks like 3 skeletons melded together with a cloak covering the monstrosity. You even fight him in a giant ass coffin covered in books and bodies that have been operated on. The lore implications here are vast, but boop boop bye bye, onto the next gimmicky area. The Tomb of the Giants is home to even bigger skeletons than the Catacombs. Who the Giants were, why their tombs are so important, and why Nito's body is down here are things that are never really explained. I guess you could say that we're left in the dark about it. Oh dear God. I'm a month and like nearly 30 pages into the script and I can feel myself going insane. So the gimmick of this area is, what if Dark Souls, but dark? For the first half of this section, you're going to need to inch your way through pretty much complete darkness unless you found the Sunlight Maggot helmet or have somehow gotten a head lantern. Eventually, you will run into Patches, the omnipotent god of not only this game, but the entire Demon Dark Souls-born franchise, appearing in every game in some shape or ungodly form. It is heavily implied and nearly confirmed in the 3rd game that all the item descriptions are written by him, meaning that Patches has a near encyclopedic knowledge of the entire history of Lordran. And he really hates clerics, which, as an Irish Catholic, I feel you, man. I fucking feel you. When you meet him, he'll tell you about a great treasure just down that precarious ledge over there. He then kicks you into the pit where, ironically, you can find a lantern to make the rest of the area much easier at the expense of your offhand weapon. If you look to the side here, you can see the lava from the Demon Ruins and an area that you will eventually pass through later, which makes me think that these areas were originally planned to directly link up with each other. As you continue to descend with light now in hand, you begin to realize how small the area actually is once you know the way and you're not terrified of the lurking darkness. From the bonfire about halfway through the area to the boss is a quick sprint made slightly more annoying by a single ledge that you're forced to engage enemies on, but eventually you will make it to the boss encounter, Nito, the first of the dead. It's time for the obligatory room full of skeletons boss fight. Just like Poison Swamps, it seems to come up in every game in the main trilogy. Nito is a big, slow, ramshackle boss that will follow you around the arena, swinging his sword and doing area of effect attacks. The main obstacle in this fight is the hordes of enemies you have to deal with while keeping Nito at bay. The much more nimble skeletons can catch you by surprise, and while they can't do a ton of damage, they can keep you trapped long enough to get caught in Nito's miasma. However, unlike most enemies in the game, the bosses are able to hurt the other enemies, which means that Nito is able to hurt his servants, usually taking out most of them in a single swing. The only thing you have to truly worry about is the greatest enemy in the Dark Souls franchise, the grab attack hitbox. Like almost all grab attacks in the series, this thing grabs hold of you at the stupidest times, at the most ridiculous angles, and drains a ton of your health. I don't know who programs the grab animations for this game, but that guy is lazy as shit. Once he's down, you receive your second Lord Soul and can finally leave this dank, dirty hellscape. The Tomb of the Giants is a very interesting area, and the first half of it is actually quite tense as you inch your way through this dark unknown with giant enemies around every single corner. One of the biggest complaints that I have with the area, however, is that until you find the first bonfire, you have to make your way back from the catacombs every single time you die here, which is really, really easy to do considering how many treacherous instant kill death falls there are. It just would have been nice if you could instantly attempt the area again, or at least a little bit faster, maybe giving you a bonfire in Pinwheel's arena once he dies. They do that with a couple of other bosses. I don't know why they can't do it with him, because ultimately what that means is they had to make the area quite small in order to stop this frustration from happening. It's one of the first times that you start to see the corners being cut in the game's world design, and it's kind of sad because the area itself has a great concept, forcing you to one-hand your weapon for the first time, maybe if you're a two-handed weapon user, or to give up your shield, which a lot of people rely on for a light source, was a great mechanic, completely underutilized. As for Nito as a boss, he's pretty good. He actually challenges you in ways that the game doesn't usually throw at you. Dark Souls is a game about one-on-one fighting, or two-on-one very few times do you have to fight entire rooms full of enemies, and you're not really supposed to fight the skeletons in Nito's boss room, you're supposed to use him against them, and I thought that this was a great way to challenge the player in a new and unique way that you haven't seen before, which is something that the game struggles to do in the second half, as I said. For attempting to do something a little bit different, I'm going to give Nito a B on the boss ranking, as I think he's probably my favorite of the 4 Lord Souls that you have to find. I know for some people this can be the 4 Kings, but I really don't like that fight. I think Nito, he does something a bit different. He's a challenging fight, and his boss run isn't super fucking annoying, so I'm going to give him a B. The next area to head to is the Duke's Archives, so I sure hope you know where this cutscene is telling you to go. The Archives have not just 1, but 3 gimmicks that don't appear anywhere else in the game. The first thing you notice as you enter is the Crystal Golemn, who doesn't seem to be paying much attention to you as you enter, as opposed to the other enemies. Upon defeating him, you get a broken pendant, which is something that you're going to need to access the DLC later. Moving through the first part of this area isn't actually too difficult, especially at this level as a character. You just gotta keep doot-dooting the crystal enemies and avoid the projectiles until you reach the boss fog gate, and then it's time to prepare. Prepare to die? Get it? Okay, no, but seriously, no matter how much you try, it's impossible to actually kill or even damage Seath during this fight. Instead, you can only delay the inevitable. So if this is your first time doing a blind playthrough, well then, fuck you, I guess. The fight has to go this way, and the fact that you respawn at a different bonfire is a cool twist, but anything that kills the player without a realistic way to counteract it is always an unwelcome departure from the ethos of the series, and it's not surprising it was cut from later games. I guess by this point you should really learn to not be attached to your souls, but it's still frustrating. But like with the Bridge Drake, it is what it is, and every subsequent playthrough you can anticipate it and wear a Ring of Sacrifices, or you can head back into the room after you escape and homeward bone out with your souls. After the fight, you find yourself at a bonfire locked in a jail cell, being guarded by the Snake Men of Sens Fortress. The only other time you respawn back at a bonfire that isn't the one you previously rested at is when you kill the Firekeeper of Anor Londo and then die there. So, how Seath managed to trap you here is a mystery, but it wouldn't be too much of a jump to assume that he did it by experimenting on a Firekeeper's soul. Anyway, after you get your bearings, you can spot one of the Snake Men guards slacking off, leaning against your cell. It's really hard to get good help these days. No great escape levels of cunning are needed, you can just wail on him through the door. After you get out, heading up the stairs will lead you to a dead end, and heading down you'll find some eldritch horrors, which you can just ignore and head to the lever. If you wish to free Big Hat Logan, you can take out the Tentacle Men, but otherwise you just need to lure the other Squiddos down to you, who will open a ladder back to the Duke's Archives. Here we meet the second gimmick in the area, the moving staircases. It's a pretty easy puzzle to figure out, and you can spend some extra time here if you want to find all the items, but your ultimate goal is to make it down to the ground floor. Once you rest at the bonfire, saving your progress, it's off to the Crystal Caves. The Crystal Caves as an area is amazing to look at, and once again the game is testing your patience and ability to navigate narrow walkways, except this time the walkways are invisible. Thanks, Dark Souls! Your main method for finding out where the walkways are located is to watch the kind of crystalline dust falling from the roof. If it touches one of the ramps, it will make this sort of little poofy particle effect thing, which tells you that it's safe to walk there. This is also an area where the player messages come in incredibly handy, as most of the time you'll find orange call signs helping you find your way. After you make it to the other side, you can push past the shell monsters and head in to fight Seath for real this time. After fighting you in the archives, Seath has retreated here, assured that you are now safely locked away in his prison. The reason he's camped out here is to be close to a very important artifact, the Primordial Crystal. As we know from the opening cutscene, Seath is the only dragon that wasn't immortal because he lacked the immortality-giving scales of his brethren, which caused him to betray them out of what seems like pure jealousy. It's like a really dark version of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, where instead of finding out that he has some sort of a higher purpose that can, contribute to the cause, Rudolph just showed up and took revenge on all the other reindeer who made fun of him constantly. So in order to make up for his little PP energy, Seath has discovered a new way to make himself immortal that has something to do with this primordial crystal. So before we start the fight, we're just gonna go ahead and, yeah, there we go, we're gonna break that shit. Yeah, how does it feel to be mortal? Actually, unlike me, pleb. Once you figure out that that's what you need to do, the rest of the fight can be a little bit underwhelming. Seath is another big, slow, hard-hitting boss with a couple of area of effects to deal with. If you've been paying attention to the nature of the crystal, you'd notice that the statues you find around the Duke's Archives look a lot like those cursed by the basilisks in the depths. So having a decent curse resist is very helpful. If you do get cursed, the clams outside have a small chance of dropping a purging stone, and you can always warp back here if you want to go buy some. The fight with Seath is more about the anticipation and the cat and mouse nature of him evading you. That and the boss run is long and annoying, so just beat him down as fast as you can, cut off his tail, and he shouldn't give you much trouble. As an area, the Duke's Archives looks very impressive and grandiose and gives you a sense of scale, but when you look at it objectively, the area that you can actually traverse inside of it is pretty small. The gimmicks that they employ here are interesting for a little bit, but can become quite frustrating, especially in the Crystal Cave section, where sometimes you feel like you fell off of something when you shouldn't have, and this comes into play in the actual visible structures as opposed to the invisible ones. The invisible ones are actually quite generous in their detection, but some of the ones that you can see, you just slide right off for no apparent reason, and they don't really give you an indication that you have to be careful on them. Seath as a boss is pretty easy, especially at this point in the game, and the only real threat that he has towards you is his curse ability, which can force you to have to backtrack. But at this point, 5,000 souls for a purging stone at the undead merchant in the sewer isn't a lot. It becomes far more of an inconvenience. So, for the unique nature in which Seath engages you, I'm going to put him as a C on the tier list. There are 3 daughters of the Witch of Lost Izalith. The first is Qualaag, who we have been acquainted with. There is also Qualanna, the only sister who seems to have not been touched by the Chaos Flame. And the third sister is known as the Fair Lady. After the creation of the Chaos Flame, the denizens of Lost Izalith were cut off from the rest of Lordran, but they still needed to be connected to the first flame. This led to the need for a firekeeper to maintain the bonfires, a task whose responsibility fell to the Chaos Daughter. However, she also had a second task to spawn the new race of demons, and you can see her egg-infected offspring everywhere. Her room is hidden behind an illusory wall, and we find her near death, unable to speak and trying to desperately keep the flame alive. Talking to her servant something, he tells us her story and that the Fair Lady needs humanity to keep her children alive. By entering the Covenant and offering up 30 humanity, you can open up a shortcut in the Demon Ruins that is extremely important to save Solaire and complete his quest line. And since he's the only one that I'm really taking seriously on this run, that's what we're going to do, and I just thought I'd do a quick aside here to explain this whole process to you so that it makes sense when we get to it. If the great fire that keeps the world alive is going out, it only makes sense for someone to try and simply replace it rather than to try to tamper with something so primal. So the Witch of Izalith, along with her daughters, created the Flame of Chaos, but its nature was not the same as the first flame. Instead of replacing the flame, it became its own entity and spawned an entirely new race of beings known as the demons. Because of this, Izalith became Lost Izalith and was sealed away to protect others. But although demons are a common enemy in Dark Souls, they don't seem to be completely mindless, being used as prison wardens for Gwyn's Undead Asylums and showing knowledge of not only architecture but art. Okay, listen, it might not be to your taste, but it is art, okay sweetie? The Demon Ruins also have a nasty reputation of being a mostly unfinished area, as demonstrated by the vast open sea of orange Fanta that makes up about 80% of the area's surface level. So the first thing that you have to do is clean some of it up. The Demon Ruins is a long area, and it has 4 bosses in total, the most of any area in the game except for the DLC. And the first one is an area-shaping monstrosity known as Ceaseless Discharge, a condition that your mother suffers from when I come around. God, I'm on fire today! Not unlike Ceaseless Discharge. But first, let's go pick up some new threads. The gold hem set, which is a favorite fashion choice of the Daughters of Chaos. Oh, I think we might have made him angry. Ceaseless Discharge is a broken boss, plain and simple. His attacks range from completely missing you to one-shot killing you when neither should be the case. The only real strategy is to get some fire protection and just kinda hope for the best. He's an easy kill once you get a few good hits on him, and most players have little to no trouble with him. Once he's defeated, his Ceaseless Discharge ceases, and the lava on the ground below begins to flow away, leaving the area open to explore. The place is now full of Taurus and Capra Demons, this being the second time that a boss is thrown at you as a standard enemy, and this time I think it actually works quite well. The Taurus and Capra Demons gave us so many problems in the early stages of the game, to now start mowing them down with ease gives you a sense of how much more powerful you've become. They do have roughly about 300 HP less than their main boss equivalent, but I bet you never thought you'd be taking on 5 of them in a row and prevailing. With the way clear, you can now make your way to the ruins proper and past the statue demons to the area's second boss and yet another reused enemy. So apparently the Chaos Flame is not the flame of creativity, because although it was able to make make demons, it could only create like 3 different types. The Fire Sage is a reskin of the Stray Demon that you fought on your return to the Asylum with slightly faster animations and fire damage this time. He's still not a challenge, and this is just lazy at this point, so he's going on the bottom of the tier list. Reusing bosses as regular enemies gives the demons a bit of continuity, portraying them as a race of people, not just one-off monsters. But bosses should feel unique, and using the same one 3 times without a good lore reason is just bad, and lazy, and bad, and bad. This boss could have been removed and nothing would be lost. If you push on a little bit further, you find an elevator shortcut back up to the top so that you can use the Daughters of Chaos bonfire as your checkpoint. And at the bottom, we find another fog gate and yet another boss fight in quick succession. Apparently, we're just taking random words and then adding demon at the end for our boss ideas now. The Centipede Demon can be defeated pretty easily, and its main purpose is to drop the orange charred ring, which allows you to traverse the lava in the Demon Ruins. If you're having trouble with the boss because of the lava in the arena, you can actually get the ring early by cleaving off his tail, allowing you to equip it during the fight, but it really shouldn't be a problem. You can also summon Solaire for this fight if you really need some extra firepower. The Centipede becomes just another large, thrashing beast in a dangerous arena type of boss, and there's a special place on the tier list for bosses like that. Like we mentioned before, the Fair Lady opens up a shortcut from the Demon Ruins to Lost Izalith, which completely bypasses the previous 2 bosses that we just went over. And 30 humanity is a small price to pay to not have to remind myself how lazy and uninspired this section of the game is. But most importantly, it reveals these little bastards right here. Now, here at Dan's Head, we want to make it clear that 8 out of 9 maggots are completely harmless, and we do not condone prejudice towards the maggot community. But one of these little shits is going to infect my baby Solaire if we don't do something, so it's time to exterminate them all. This ensures that Solaire survives his time in Lost Izalith and will be present for the final fight against Gwyn. Going the intended way through Lost Izalith, you first have to go through this open sea of lava. There's items to collect around here, but other than that, you can just make a straight run across to the city itself. You can fight the thick-ass dragon butts if you want, but this area exists just to exist, and you can safely move on and get through this train wreck of a level as quick as you can. In Izalith, you can find the next part of Siegmeyer's quest, and for my playthrough, the final part. I forgot that you could deal friendly damage to him, so as we rode into battle together, I ended up killing him by mistake. Oopsie. But this is the beauty of Dark Souls quest design. The unfinished story of Siegmeyer and his untimely death in Lost Izalith becomes his story. In this version of Lordran, in this timeline affected by this version of the Chosen Undead, Siegmeyer of Katarina is slain before he can reignite with his daughter. Okay, time to head to the boss of this area, but before we do, you're ambushed by Qualaag, one of the Witch of Izalith's daughters. She is a very powerful pyromancer, but clearly hasn't been lifting because her flimsy robes don't do much to defend against a giant fucking sword. Nothing in this game can resist my giant fucking sword. So, after she's gone, it's on to the bed of chaos. Whee! This slide is the most fun you're gonna have with this boss fight. The level of ineptitude that went into this boss can be seen in every single facet of its design and mechanics. So before we start going over all the ways that this boss is terrible, it's worth mentioning that in the design work interviews, the devs have claimed that the Bed of Chaos was implemented into the game completely unfinished. Now, this is by no means an excuse, but it does serve as an explanation. Unlike every other boss in the game, the Bed of Chaos is more of an obstacle/puzzle than an enemy that you trade blows with. On either side of the writhing mass of tentacles, there is a glowing root which you must destroy in order to get to the main entity at the center. After the first root is destroyed, the arena begins to fall apart, and the bed itself starts to make these large, sweeping attacks that can wipe you off the floor quite easily. And I've done this boss a number of times now, and can say without a doubt, and you can quote me on this, that there is literally no way to complete this in the intended way without pure luck. And I have a suspicion that the devs agree with me. You see, if you manage to destroy one of the roots and are then killed, you'll find that the root is still destroyed when you get back into the arena. This is the only time that this kind of leniency is given to the player, which makes it stand out even more as a cop-out to cover up the bad design of the boss. Once you make it to the center, you'll find the Chaos Bug, which seems to be all that is left of the Witch of Izalith. With only 2 HP, essentially any attack will destroy it in one hit, causing the rest of the body to burn up. It's interesting that the Bed of Chaos, which spawns all all of the demons in the entire world, has this wooden branch-like body, not unlike the great old one from Demon Souls. After the boss dies, you find yourself left in the boss arena with no way out but a newly spawned bonfire for your teleporting pleasure. This to me is the final insult of this area, although it isn't the only boss fight that does this. All 4 of the Lord Soul fights end with you stranded in the boss arena, which makes each of these areas feel stuck onto the interconnected world rather than being interwoven into them. But it's the most egregious with the bitter, lingering taste of the Bed of Chaos and Lost Izalith as a whole still in your mouth. I never know if I should do the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith first after getting the Lord Vessel or last, because first I just want to put it off because I don't want to deal with the place, and then last it always just leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. Thankfully though, we have the DLC coming up, which can reinvigorate you a little bit. The DLC is probably some of the finest parts of Dark Souls, but my god is the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith lazy, uninspired, unfinished, and honestly they should have just taken it out of the game. You know, give Sif a Lord Soul. You know, Sif deserves a Lord Soul, okay? I would have loved to have gotten a Lord Soul after killing Sif. I don't want to kill the Bed of Chaos. From here, it's possible to give all of these souls that you found to the Lord Vessel and head straight over to Gwyn, but there is a couple more places to go that are purely optional as well as the DLC. And the first one that we're going to go to is the most mysterious place in all of Lordran, Ash Lake. First, we have to get there though. Ash Lake is the lowest point in Lordran, so the hunt begins at the lowest place that we currently know of. Okay, seriously, stop. Just stop it, okay? The joke's not funny anymore. I'm not sure if it was ever funny, and soon this whole bit about pretending to talk to some off-screen editor is also going to run dry, okay? Sorry about that, guys. I think that making this video is making me go insane. Once in Blighttown, we have to brave the swamp once again and make our way to the Great Hollow, a giant hollowed-out tree that leads from the base of Blighttown all the way down to Ash Lake. The monsters you find here include the Mushroom Men from Darkroot Garden and the Basilisks of the Depths. There's a bunch of items to collect, some of which require controlled falling and platforming to reach, but eventually you'll hit the bottom and come out onto a strange sight. Ash Lake is truly like nothing else in all of Lordran. A vast open body of water that stretches out past the horizon, and as far out as you can see is what appears to be the arch trees from the opening cutscene. And of course you're hit with that incredible music which sets the haunting mood of the area. Ash Lake is one of the few places in Dark Souls to feature ambient music, which plays the entire time you're there, with Firelink, Guinevere's Chambers, and the Daughters of Chaos Bonfire being the only other places. This makes the moments when music does eventually kick in so much more impactful, and this is especially true for Ash Lake. The music here somewhat resembles Gregorian chanting, which is a style of music practiced in medieval Europe. The chanting usually comprises of 2 separate voice lines, which move in unison and are either a 4th or a 5th interval apart from each other, giving them this rounded out pleasant sound. The music at Ash Lake is far more dissonant than this, but the style of the music evokes this sense of reverence, as if this place holds some kind of importance that transcends the world above. Looking up, we expect to see the ground of Lordran above us being held up by the great arch trees. Instead, we find a fog. Fog used to inhabit all of the world before the first flame came around, and the everlasting dragons existed within this fog. In the beginning, we clearly see the war between the ancient lords and the dragons is taking place in Ash Lake before all the water, and below the arch trees where the first flame erupts is a dark cavernous area, which means that Ash Lake itself is not underground, as then there would be no light here. Instead, it seems to have retained the same strange grey stillness that it had before the ancient war. In the small part of Ash Lake we can actually traverse, we find another Hydra who drops a dragon scale when he dies, implying that Hydras are descendants of the dragons. Oh, and just a little tip, don't try to run away from this Hydra, because this will happen. 5+ playthroughs and I've never seen this nightmare feel before. At the end of the walkway we find the last of the everlasting dragons, deformed and maintaining a bonfire for some reason. Resting here refills your Estus to 10, meaning there's a good chance that this dragon is a firekeeper, and like the Daughters of Chaos, they have their own covenant that you can join. And that's it for Ash Lake. It's a tiny area, at least the parts that you can walk on are, and there's very little down here. Sigmayr's questline does finish up here if you manage to keep him alive, but nothing else really goes on. There are 2 theories to what this place is and its function in Lordran. The first theory is that Ash Lake is simply the lowest point in the world, a kind of subspace with the arch trees holding up the ground above it. This is the easiest explanation, and it parallels things like Yggdrasil and other world-supporting trees in ancient mythology. But it leaves an awful lot of questions, such as why can't you see the ground above you? Where is all the light coming from? And why can't you see the top of any of the other arch trees in the overworld, even though they don't look that far away from you? The other popular theory, and the one that I ascribe to the most, is that each arch tree acts as a kind of a portal to another world, with each one holding up its own world on top, perhaps Lordran on a different timeline, which is why time is convoluted and why we appear in a wisp of fog when summoned or invading. This could also explain the fog barrier between Ash Lake and the upper world. As you descend, you pass through a portal to a different dimension. The one big flaw in this theory is that Ash Lake can be seen from a place within the Tomb of the Giants, which seemingly tears this theory apart. However, the opening can't be seen anywhere within Ash Lake, and the horizon stretches out so far that you should easily be able to see a cliffside where this opening corresponds to. So maybe the hole we see in the Tomb of the Giants is a one-way puncture in the fabric between the two dimensions that you can see through. Or this is a mistake left by the developers, with Ash Lake being a more prominent area in the initial planning of the game. Either way, this is the theory that I ascribe to, but there are holes in both that make neither really plausible and require you to ignore some of the facts to believe in one. This is one of the times when Dark Souls is possibly a bit too vague and self-contradictory, and it's something that I'm going to go over at the end. I've always found the name Great Hollow very interesting. There's a bit of debate around how faithful the translations in the Dark Souls franchise are, especially in the first two games. But it does seem a little bit careless to use a word as important and prominent as hollow to describe something without it having some kind of significance. I think the tree that we use to enter Ash Lake being hollow is some kind of parallel to the hollowing of the population above. Perhaps the hollow creatures which emerged when the first flame appeared were living inside of the tree or were even made of it. And as they formed, the tree hollowed. If it is a coincidence, then it's one of the worst name choices in video game history. We just have one more place to visit before tackling the DLC and the end of the game, and it is a peaceful place full of kind inhabitants. Oh dear God! The Painted World of Ariamis is the only true alternate dimension in the game, a place where the ancient gods could seal away all the things that they were ashamed of or feared. Some people consider it a prison, but the inhabitants call it home and stay there voluntarily, with many people who have been exiled or lost their way in the world finding their way to it. To get there, you have to take the doll you found in your cell in the asylum to the giant painting in the Anor Londo chapel. The Painted World is a short but incredibly interesting area which almost seems like an idea dump, a place to just put all the things that they couldn't really fully flesh out in the main game. According to the developer interviews, it was the first area designed for the game, and when they couldn't find a place for it to fit in the overworld, it became the alternate dimension that we know of now. Most of the enemies and items we find in the zone have some connection to Velka, the god of sin, someone who's only ever mentioned by other characters, mainly her followers such as Oswald. The half-crow people are more than likely her creations, as the crow is strongly associated with her. Many of the items you find in the world are associated with the occult status effect, which, as we said earlier, is something that can challenge the immortality of the gods. But the main purpose of the painting is the leader of the lands, Priscilla the half-breed, previous owner of the peculiar doll. The term half-breed in her name refers to her dragon lineage, the origins of which are a mystery. It's highly likely that Seath was involved due to the many hybrid experiments he's taken part in, turning people into snake men and the like. But Priscilla's main power is Life Hunt, an ability that rivals the power of the occult and Life Drain. Because of this, there's a good chance that Velka had a hand in her creation, but again, none of this is confirmed. When you meet her, she tells you to simply leave and to not bother the inhabitants of her realm. She doesn't say much, but her soft-spokenness can make you genuinely feel bad for attacking her, but I still gotta do it for the video, guys! Before we do that, let's just take a little quick, oh yeah, that's the good stuff. Priscilla spends most of the fight invisible as she tries to get in as close as she can to attack you without giving you a chance to react. Thanks to the snow in the area, you can track her movements by following her sweet footprints. Damn it, Miyazaki, stop enticing me, I'm trying to focus here. Her attacks are easy to dodge when she's visible, but can catch you off guard quite handily. Like a lot of enemies that have this kind of gimmick attached to them, they're most memorable the first time you encounter them while trying to figure out how to fight that which you cannot see. Once you know to look for the footprints, the fight becomes incredibly easy. I think this may have been on purpose, however. A large, soft-spoken creature who gives you the option not to fight and prefers to avoid confrontation by becoming invisible. Killing her just never feels good or satisfying, but I'm doing this for all of you. Whether you kill her or choose to leave peacefully, you can head off to the broken walkway and jump, which will let you leave the painting. As an enigma, Priscilla is a really interesting creature to run into. It's a shame she's relegated to such a minor role in the game and sort of stuck on as an addendum. As a boss, her fight is creative and memorable, but not too challenging, and the gimmick only works to hinder you until you've figured it out. Afterwards, she'll never give you too much trouble. The area itself asks a lot more questions than it actually answers, but as an additional bonus place to just explore some cut content, it's a nice addition. And the fact that it's so hard to find, having to go to one optional area after another, and take seemingly unrelated items around the world, it feels special when you find it on your own. And I don't think that the place was ever meant to be taken too seriously. Some people do dive head first into the lore of the area, especially because of the connections to Velka, but Velka is an underdeveloped character at best, and she's there more to fill in the kind of god of sin role in the mythos. And that's about it for the main content of the game. Gwyn now awaits us at the end of the world, but first, it's time to take a step into Lordran's past. If you've been chatting to NPCs and paying attention, you'll know that the Abyss has tried to envelop the world a number of times throughout history. One of these attempts was thwarted by the Great Knight Artorias and his faithful hound, Seath, who we've met before. Artorias fell during the battle, but the Abyss was driven back and the township of Ulasil was saved from being completely enveloped. But in a world where time is constantly in flux, can something ever be known so definitively? By taking the pendant that we found in the Duke's archives back to where we rescued Dusk, we can see a shimmering portal off in the distance. Approaching this portal causes a giant hand, not unlike the one that Dusk described, to grab us and we are whisked away. This is the second time that an item linking us to another creature has made it possible to pass through time or space. It's worth mentioning that when people initially bought the DLC, there was no instructions on how to access it. Now, it didn't take too long for someone to find out how and to post it online, but could you imagine day one buying the DLC, you've played Dark Souls to death, you absolutely love the game, and then you're just stuck with this enigma to try to figure out. Basically, you had to have already completed the game and then figure out what was different once you restarted it and played through it again. Dusk would be there and you'd find the Golemm in the Duke's archives, but you need to be really eagle-eyed to figure it out. And for all that trouble, we're immediately confronted with the first boss of the expansion, the Sanctuary Guardian. Right out of the gate, the DLC presents you with a boss that's faster, more aggressive, and generally tougher than 90% of the bosses in the main game. The Guardian has the mobility and lock-on breaking flight of the Gargoyles. He can also poison you with his tail, which makes assaults from behind a weak strategy. This was clearly a move that was made after seeing how easy some of the beast-like bosses were if you figured out the old, stick to their arse strategy. He has 3 different ranged attacks which all require a different timing to avoid properly, and God help you if you accidentally block one of his wing attacks, because there goes your stamina bar. The Guardian requires good timing, patience, and positioning. You can tell that the devs were carefully watching how players were playing the game and tried to counteract the dominant strategies that were prevailing in order to keep people on their toes. Overall, a great boss, serving as a DPS and skill check for players entering the DLC, and a warning of what's to come in the rest of the add-on content. After defeating the Guardian, we can head through to the Ulasil Sanctuary and meet Elizabeth. The Sanctuary is located where Artorias' eventual grave will be. The mushroom folk haven't evolved to have appendages yet, but they can pull off some pretty slick light magic that can turn you into a barrel or a tree. Very cool. She tells you that you must find Dusk, who has been captured, and she also tells you that the Knight Artorias is pottering around somewhere. You then get loaded into the Darkroot Garden daytime map, which is inhabited by the ancestors of those walking grass creatures, the forest caretakers, who shake their pitchforks at you and tell you to get off of their lawn. The area is vast and contains some really cool items, but there's not much of note here, and the stone enemies are just tanky enough to discourage methodical exploration. What we're really looking for is the Ulasil township. That has been completely lost to time. I do like the shortcut placement and how it uses the existing architecture that we know from Darkroot Garden here, but the trek to the fight with Artorias doesn't really have much going for it. Right before the fight, you run into the marvelous Red Herring. This oddly dressed fellow is unlike anything else in Lordran. Clearly a human, yet he doesn't drop humanity when killed, or have any if you try to take it with a dark hand. When you fight him, he employs a quick sidestep instead of a roll, and his weapons deal very high bleed damage, as well as his armor having a very high bleed resist. And he claims that, like you, he was pulled back in time from his own world. All of this together has led people to believe that he is in fact from Yharnam, the setting of From Software's later game Bloodborne, thereby blowing the entire lid off of the shared Soulsborne universe conspiracy that continues to pervade the community to this day. So, is the marvelous Chester's appearance here the definitive proof that we need to establish a shared link between the Souls games and Bloodborne? Here is my official opinion to this divisive question set in stone on video forever. I don't know, maybe. Well, you know what they say, never meet your heroes. It seems that the rumours of Artorias' endeavours have been greatly exaggerated, not falling in battle against Manus of the Abyss, but instead being consumed by the darkness and going mad. Some of his instincts are still with him as he attacks the infected people of Ulasil, but he also fails to recognise you as an ally. Or perhaps he sees the darkness within you and in his final moments chooses to extinguish it without prejudice. Artorias' fight is definitely a fan favourite, usually topping the list of people's favourite bosses in the entire series. And there's 3 reasons for this that usually pop up over and over, and these factors tend to be present in most people's favourite encounters. So number 1, Artorias is human-sized. There's a huge difference in Dark Souls between fighting combatants who are roughly the same size as the player and the gigantic monsters and demons that you have to deal with. Fighting oversized creatures usually plays out very similarly, requiring you to keep behind them and dodging their overly telegraphed attacks. Human-sized enemies feel more like a battle of wits, where neither party can really rely solely on their overwhelming strength, but instead on their prowess in battle, which leads me to number 2. He's aggressive, but he's not insanely strong. Artorias is a tough fight, not because he hits exceptionally hard, but because he is relentless. There are very few animations that give you a chance to heal or to let off a spell. You have to pick your moments to attack carefully, and getting greedy with a long attack combo will end in you being punished. On the other hand, he has no attacks or combos that could really outright kill a properly leveled character at this point. Artorias only has 3,750 health points, which is less than Gwyn and less than half of the 4 kings, and yet the fight can go on for quite a while, and it really tests both your endurance and your reflexes. Then there's point number 3, which is the emotional weight. If you've been paying attention to Alvina, Dusk, Elizabeth, and a number of others, the legend of Artorias has been built up in your mind quite extensively by the time you finally encounter him. But our first look at the unshakable knight of legend is this broken, possessed shell of his former self. His shield-bearing arm lies limply by his side, implying that he probably broke his arm from the sheer force of whatever attacked him, and yet he still manages to go on swinging about his massive greatsword in order to wipe out the darkness in front of him. This fight also has extra emotional weight depending on whether you do it before or after fighting Sif in the present day or the future, depending on, which way you're looking at it. And it is possible to miss all of these clues and tidbits, but the fight is tangibly better knowing all of this before you walk in. As Artorias dies by your hand, the realization that Artorias couldn't have possibly been the one to push back the abyss begins to take a hold of you. Just in front of you is the township of Ulasil, which seems to be falling prey to the same kind of outbreak which New Londo did. The abyss has spread throughout the city, infecting the human population and turning them into the creatures that you see before you. Before the Abyss Walker DLC, the choice that you have to make at the end of the game to reignite the flame in the name of Frampt or become the new Lord of Darkness under the guidance of Kath can be a tough one. We have very little information to go off of, but once you meet Gwyn and you see the unnatural form that he's taken by burning his soul into the flames, it can make the option to allow the fire to die quite appealing. But now for the first time we're seeing the effects that the Abyss and the Dark have on people, and it provides you with an unavoidable glimpse into the repercussions of that course of action. As you descend into the town, the blight of the Abyss starts to show up all over in small pockets of black goo, as the former inhabitants start to look more and more deformed. But eventually you'll make it down into the lower sections and down to the cave where the darkness is springing forward, the chasm of the Abyss. This ethereal place appears to be the grave of primeval man, according to Chester, and there's a good chance that Kath had a hand in his reawakening, just like in New Londo. Passing through the cave, most of the creatures that we encounter are these strange black sprites which bear a striking resemblance to the humanity that we consume when unhollowing, confirming what a lot of people thought about the nature of humanity, that it is born of the dark and ultimately wants to return to it. Some even believe that the reason we use humanity to relieve ourselves of the undead curse is not because it returns our humanity, but it passes the curse on to the humanity that we take into ourselves for the time that we manage to stay alive. The humanity phantoms can't actually attack, instead they just float towards you like they're trying to convince you to join them. By pressing on through the chasm, you will eventually make it to the grave of primeval man, Manus, the father of the Abyss. It's Manus, the big boy, and in my opinion, the real final boss of the entire game. Manus is a huge, lumbering, and difficult to predict brute of a boss that requires your utmost attention throughout the long and arduous fight. Manus has a number of attacks that can deal a huge amount of damage, including leaping forward a great distance or just going apeshit at you when he's in close. The further away from him you are, the more he blends in with the darkness surrounding the area, but you do not want to be too close for his most devastating attack. Manus has a 6-move combo, which is actually more of a grab attack. Once one of the attacks in the combo make contact with you, you are locked into the rest of the pummeling. The combo can completely decimate you if you're not careful, and low vitality and light armor builds will die immediately to it. It's also next to impossible to block all of the attacks without a very heavy shield and nearly maxed out endurance. And then there are his magic attacks, which can also deal a crazy amount of damage, and they usually knock you over if they hit you directly. There is an item in the township of Ulasil called the Silver Pendant, which you could use to reflect or block these attacks if you want, or you can dodge out of the way manually. Dodging through doesn't seem to work on these slower moving orbs though for some reason. In the chasm before the fight, you can find a hidden cave that houses Ceath, badly damaged from the fight with Manus, which left Artorias in such a bad way. Ceath is being guarded by Alvina, which is probably why Alvina knows that Artorias' story is so full of shit in the future. If you find this cave and rescue Ceath from the abyss, you're able to summon Ceath during the battle with Manus, which gives the entire fight this really epic, dynamic feeling as you summon allies in the heat of the moment. As a companion, Ceath can soak up some damage for you, but can also make Manus much harder to read as he's no longer always focused on you. One heart-wrenching thing though, and I think I mentioned this like an hour ago into the video, if you do this fight before fighting Ceath in the present day, Ceath will recognize you as the person who saved him and tried to save his dear master. It's a very touching, heartwarming scene, and it's really amazing that they put something like this into the game, considering most people will probably do the DLC towards the end. The fact that anybody ever found this out is a real testament to the dedication that the players have, and I feel like I say that about nearly everything in this game. When the beast goes down, he leaves behind the body of Dusk, who isn't conscious and is teleported back to the sanctuary garden. Once there, she remarks that you remind her of the knight Artorias, confirming that you were the legendary warrior that defeated the abyss in the ancient stories. Or, your presence here shifted the established events of history and created an alternative timeline where you just so happen to usurp the role from him. The game is never clear about which theory of time travel it actually ascribes to. For being the most challenging and savage boss in the entire game, Manus stands alone at the top of the tier list, S rank. And with that, you would think that we are finished in the land of Ulasil, but no, there is one last enemy to defeat before we head back to Lordran and finish what we started. Kalameet is the last of the ancient dragons, a creature that has managed to survive long into the age of the gods. He doesn't have the everlasting scales of his brothers though, so whether he really is the same species or something else entirely is up for debate. That could be the motto of this game. When you first encounter him, airborne, he is nearly impossible to kill or even damage in any meaningful way. First, the beast must be grounded, and for this, we must employ the help of one of the greatest dragon slayers within Gwyn's army, Hawkeye Goff. Goff is the one who claims that Kalameet is in fact an ancient dragon, and with his giant longbow, he plummets an oversized arrow straight through Kalameet's wing, forcing him to the ground. A shot made all the more impressive by the fact that Goff is actually blind. Sometimes I miss the toilet bowl while I'm sitting down. Kalameet is the opposite of the Artorias fight, a giant quadruped with short, mid and long range attacks that can all do massive damage. He's far more aggressive than most of the beast bosses though, so even though he has a lower health than Manus, the amount of swipes that you can take at him is much lower, and he can make the fight go on for a very long time depending on the AI. And his attacks deal so much damage that using an Estus after almost every single hit is a necessity to avoid a surprise wipeout. All of his breath attacks deal both physical and magic damage, meaning that you have to sacrifice some physical defense if you want to mitigate their effect. Once Kalameet goes down, we've come to the end of the DLC, and what is our reward? The Calamity Ring, a ring that causes you to take double damage from all enemies. Thanks, Dark Souls! What if the chosen undead isn't actually a specific person chosen at birth, but instead the subject of a self-fulfilling prophecy, the last in a long line of those who have tried and failed where you will succeed. You have bested the toughest challenges that Lordran has to offer and every safeguard put in place to stop you. You are the chosen undead by virtue of having done these things, not chosen to do them. Regardless of which is true, you are now the only being left in Lordran powerful enough to contend with Gwyn, meaning the only fate left for the world is for you to face him or the world to perish. Offering the 4 Lord Souls to the Lord Vessel will cause the door separating the kiln and the shrine to open. Inside, we find ourselves in some kind of a fog portal made to look like a staircase. The spirits of Gwyn's elite Silver Knights pass by us as incorporeal phantoms as we descend. When you make it to the end of the stairs, you find yourself in an open expanse with the kiln of the First Flame directly in front of you. Just like with Ash Lake, the actual location of the kiln is never really explained. You go straight down from Firelink, then down again, and end up outside. Also, I assume the First Flame can't actually be moved, so it still resides beneath a giant arch tree somewhere in the underworld. Regardless, it is a very striking image. There are 5 Black Knights on the way to Gwyn, the last of his battalion, who all have a huge chance to drop various Titanite chunks so that people can farm and level their gear. On the way, you find the Black Knight armor set, which reveals that the Black Knights followed Gwyn to link the flame and were consumed by it, now living as spirits inhabiting their old armor. Once you make it to the entrance, it's time to summon our trusty companion Solaire and finally end the— wait, shit, I missed the boss! These titties are a lie!
Thou that tarnisheth the Godmother's image, I am Gwyndolin. And
you done goofed.
So it's time to go kill the last of Gwyn's bloodline and the only LGBT representation in the entire game. You see, Gwyn had 2 children, well, 3 technically, but we don't talk about the 3rd one. One was named Gwyndolin and was born a male but had a proficiency in moon-based magic or moon-powered magic, which was associated with the feminine. Because of this, Gwyndolin was raised as a female. We don't know if this is by choice or by necessity, but that's how it happened. Gwyndolin now remains the only god left in Anor Londo, keeping the illusion of the sun alive. Now you have to fight them in an ever-extending hallway with this demigod firing poison arrows at you while floating around using their hidden trouser snakes. Come on, From Software, make it slightly less on the nose. Once they die, you get the Sunlight Blade Miracle, which I really should have gotten earlier because it would have made this whole thing much easier. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. Once you make it to the entrance, it's time to summon our trusty companion Solaire and finally end this. You have embodied the chosen undead, traveled the length and breadth of the land, fought creatures whose power has shaped the entire world and bested every one of them. And then at the end of the journey, you approach the Mad King who refuses to allow his world to be taken from him, expecting an epic battle to ensue. Instead, you find an old, hollowed, weakened shell of a leader tending to the last vestiges of the flame, which is eating away at his soul. A lonely, desolate scene takes place in front of you as the remnants of the old ruler of this world throws himself at you. Whether you've come here to extend the Age of Fire or to extinguish it, he has to prove your worth. The fight itself is a tragic slugfest between you and the lurking big bad that's been hinted at throughout the entire game. The sad, dissonant piano music, which has become the stuff of legend at this point, and the clangs of metal as you both desperately hack away at each other, is a fittingly solemn end to the game and the world in general, because regardless of whether you link the flame or let it die, it will be forever changed. Gwyn's soul claims that over the time he's been here, he has weakened considerably, but you wouldn't be able to tell that from the way he fights. He attacks quickly and relentlessly, and his range is unpredictable because of the flames that protrude from the top of his sword. In a one-on-one duel, finding an opportunity to attack can be quite taxing. Years later, there are dominant strategies that people have figured out, including the parry exploit, which essentially allows you to manipulate the AI and get consecutive ripostes to make the fight kinda trivial. I preferred to take Solaire with me and finish his questline, which makes the fight much easier. And I don't think that Gwyn needs to be a difficult fight for his battle to be poignant. Like Vendrick in the second game, the easier his defeat, the more sympathy I have for his plight. As Gwyn dies and the music fades away, you're left alone in the room with a fog gate behind you and the bonfire in front of you, and now it is time to make your choice. Do you become the inheritor of a new world of darkness, or do you feed your soul to the flame, fulfill the prophecy, and allow the Age of Fire to continue to limp on until it begins to fade again? The choice is ultimately yours, but there is some interesting questions to be had about which is the canon ending of the game. It follows logically that if there are sequels, then there must be more time in this universe, which means that we must have linked the flame, right? But what if that isn't the only option? What if it doesn't actually matter which we choose? What if linking the flame allows the fire to burn on just a little bit brighter, but then what? The next undead will show up and the primordial serpents will have their way again. What happens when the first undead decides not to link the flame? Is there a contingency for this? Because there seems to be many cycles between the first one, which we seem to be in now, and the final one that happens in the third game, and all the variations in between which cause Drang Lake to form in the center. If we link the flame, then the fire goes on for longer, but if we don't link the flame, the world returns not to darkness, it returns to grey stillness, because we're told at the start that the disparity that the light caused is what caused the darkness to come forward. If the flame is completely extinguished, then there is no light to create the darkness. We go back to the time before the ancient dragons. And then what's to stop another flame from simply erupting again? Regardless of which one you choose, the game ends here and it fades to black, immediately throwing you into New Game Plus once the credits roll. The nature of New Game Plus in relation to how it fits into the world of Lordran with its convoluted time stream has given some players cause to believe that each subsequent playthrough is another cycle of the world. The opening cutscene that plays as you start again leads in such a way that you could assume everything that happened in the first playthrough is just a continuation of the opening cinematic. The concept of the world going through many iterations as each Age of Fire prospers and declines is a central theme of the third game. The idea being that with each new cycle, there are minute differences, but those differences build up over time to eventually change the entire world until it becomes Drang Lake from Dark Souls 2, before eventually having all the timelines converge in an entropic way in Dark Souls 3. Whether this is true or just grasping at straws for the last piece of juicy lore that we can extract from this game isn't clear even now that the series is over. Perhaps Elden Ring will somehow tie everything together. I have a very sneaking suspicion that it's going to have a lot more to do with Dark Souls than From Software is letting on. But for now, this is the end of the analysis of the game section by section, but there's a couple of more things that I want to explore about the game's themes and its overall impact on the gaming landscape. Since the release, and more importantly, the success of the Dark Souls franchise, there have been many games that have tried to capture the magic that From Software have hit upon. The degree to which these games have copied the Souls series varies from game to game, and what makes something a Souls-like is up for debate more so than with other genres. Dark Souls introduced a number of mechanics that culminated into the games that we know now, some of which are not entirely unique to this series. I mean, action games have had dodge rolling for years before 2009. The Elder Scrolls series, which Demon Souls was originally supposed to emulate, has had a stamina system that was important for like at least 3 games. One of the most iconic elements that most people would agree is fundamental to a Souls game is the difficulty, usually focusing on player skill over raw numbers and stats. But this was the standard in older titles, and even when Demon Souls came out, the difficulty was praised as being a return to the past and not an introduction as a new concept. Even the lore-based environmental storytelling could be attributed somewhat to the Half-Life series, where we're constantly left in the dark about the true nature of what's going on, being manipulated by otherworldly forces, with you left to fill in the blanks. Oh, this is sounding very familiar. The two most unique aspects that Dark Souls introduced to gaming were the online functionalities and the respawn mechanic. The idea of enemies respawning on death and having to reclaim your lost souls, or blood, or salt, or whatever the fuck it is in this game, has remained a staple of the genre and is a key factor in whether a game is a Souls-like or simply inspired by it. The idea was so successful that it is now largely ripped off in other games with basically no tweaking at all to how it works. The risk-reward-punishment dynamic that it creates is finely tuned and answers a problem that games have been suffering from for a while, which is a disjointed checkpoint system. As the genre progressed, some games have added new caveats, such as giving you a time limit to reach your corpse or having your XP enter a nearby enemy, but the concept hasn't been altered all that much and will probably be sticking around for a while. The invasion and summoning system hasn't really been tried much outside of direct Dark Souls imitators. The closest that I can think of is in the game Journey, where you can be spontaneously paired up with other players for a certain leg of the game. This is the one part of Dark Souls that I think has the most potential for widespread adoption into other genres and types of games, but also one that may never be able to shake its connection to its roots. But Dark Souls is more than just a sum of its parts. There's a huge amount of games that have tried to emulate the success of the franchise with their own spin. You can play Wii Weeb Souls, Vampire Weeb Souls, Star Wars Souls, 2D Souls, and so on and so forth. And while these games have their own following and share a large fan base with the Dark Souls franchise, there isn't really a large conversation about who did it better. Dark Souls is the undisputed most loved game series in this genre, but how can that be if we and its competitors can identify and copy its unique elements? Let's take a look at a similar game and try to figure out why you can't simply imitate Dark Souls and expect to capture the same lightning in a bottle. Lords of the Fallen was the first AAA game to really take a stab emulating the Dark Souls franchise, and by emulate, I mean they almost note for note copied the fucking thing. I'm 40 pages into this goddamn script and I'm just gonna let another YouTuber, Iron Pineapple, sum it up. Take it away, Iron!
On paper, the mechanics are virtually identical. Stamina-based sword and shield combat, rolling with iframes, 3 different types of rolls depending on your weight, backstabs, parries, two-handing a weapon, an Estus flask, bonfires, losing experience when you die, similar bosses, and even a useless stat to trick new players. On top of that, the aesthetics of the game are also very similar. Just like Souls, Lords of the Fallen has a grim dark fantasy setting with demons and magic and whatnot. Kinda rings a bell.
Lords of the Fallen came out 7 months after Dark Souls 2, and yet even with 3 Souls games to straight up copy from, they still managed to fuck the game up. Lords of the Fallen is the game that you would make if you've only ever read about Dark Souls on Fextra Life. Deck 13 mistook the genuinely morbid and depressing atmosphere of Dark Souls for edginess. They heard that Dark Souls had slow and meticulous combat and translated it into the most awkward animations that I've seen in a game that somebody expects me to pay money for. It goes far beyond just being a bad ripoff. The game fails on a number of fundamental levels because although they had the Dark Souls formula, they had no clue what to do with it. The Souls franchise and its idiosyncrasies were a labour of love and the result of a strong vision. Other games can take from them, but it will be at least another console generation, I think, until someone can truly evolve upon the precedent that Dark Souls has set. One thing that Lords of the Fallen didn't try to ape from the Souls games was its storytelling method though, which brings me on to my next point. In a Design Works interview, Miyazaki gave some insight into his process for crafting the story of Dark Souls. Apparently, as a child, he would read fantasy novels, but he couldn't always understand the complicated kanji symbols. This would leave gaps in the story that he would then fill in with his own imagination. Later, this would become the basis for the cryptic storytelling of the Souls games, where the line between discovering, deducing, and just guessing are always a little blurred. The story was so difficult to work out that From Software put on a competition to see who could actually explain what the hell was going on in Dark Souls 1 and 2, and the winners won a whopping 10,000 somethings, I don't know what the currency was, for their troubles. But even after announcing the winners, From Software never actually confirmed whether everything they said was 100% right, or if they were just the closest to the mark, and I have a sneaking suspicion that the answer is neither. For every mystery in the game, I would expect that I could walk into Miyazaki's office and say, "Hey buddy, what's going on? It's been a long time. Could I check the master document for the actual answer to this very important question?" and then get the definitive canon explanation. However, there are a few things in the game that feel like they've left the answer vague rather than obscure the truth, and there isn't actually an answer to the mystery, or at least not a definitive one. Take the way in which time works, for example. The cyclical nature makes sense for Dark Souls 1 leading into Dark Souls 3, but then why is it only really elements of Lordran that make it into the third game, with Drang Lake being almost completely forgotten to time? I don't think the actual mechanics are written down anywhere or could be explained by any of the devs. As previously mentioned, Ash Lake is an area that makes no sense. I can think of 10 different theories that would fit into the game that could all be correct, but I get the feeling the actual answer doesn't exist. It's in the game to perplex. And worse than that, there's contradicting evidence presented in the world. So is this really a problem? After all, it's an incredibly unique way to present a story to players. I think the idea of obscuring the truth of what's happening to the player can set up some amazing mysteries. The truth about the ending, for example, and choosing which of the serpents to listen to is a great way to cast doubt in the player's mind. It's the characters that are messing with your understanding of the world, not the devs. When the developers leave something in the game, especially like an environmental feature, we need to be able to see that as a factual, concrete piece of evidence, with others' recollections and statements and points of view being the veil. You should distrust the characters and trust the devs. Now, this is not the worst thing about the series. In fact, some people have done pretty well for themselves trying to spin the Dark Souls story into a mostly factual yarn. But I would like to know if there is some sort of Silmarillion-sized epic detailing every actual event in chronological order that they stick to and deviate from as needed, but I don't know if that's true. And if it isn't, it, for me at least, cheapens the experience slightly, as you can't actually chase a mystery that doesn't have a solution. But there are some who love this aspect of the game and maybe identify with Miyazaki's mad-libbed childhood story. Man, Dark Souls has been out for over 10 years at this point. Demon Souls is coming up on 12, and even now, the community is still quite strong, but you can see the signs of it dwindling. During my playthrough, I got invaded probably twice, but I found it hard to find people to summon by the time I got to Anor Londo. There were still signs of a community, however. In the Undead Parish, the bell was chiming consistently, and the player messages were littered everywhere, some with hundreds of upvotes. Perhaps most people now play in New Game Plus, which I didn't really dive too deep into, but this does raise some interesting questions about the longevity of the game and the series. Imagine it's the year 2035 and Dark Souls has been out for over 20 years at this point. It has reached the same level of prestige that games like Ocarina of Time have in today's culture, in that many people still have an interest in playing it, but it's incredibly outdated by today's standards. But unlike with Ocarina, where I could track down a Nintendo 64 or an emulator and play the game exactly the way people did when it was originally released, what happens when the Dark Souls servers are finally retired? It's totally possible to enjoy Dark Souls as a purely single-player experience, but the social aspect of the game is a truly enriching function. I would argue that you're only playing half of what Dark Souls has to offer if you play without being able to interact with other people. Then there's the more practical aspects. What about Covenant-based achievements once there's no one to protect Darkroot Garden from or sinners to punish? I guess you could say the same about any game with online-only achievements, but it's something to think about. The lack of player messages could also lead to many people being forced to use guides, which dilutes the experience of exploring. Until the inevitable happens, there are events planned to increase the amount of players on the servers and give people the chance to experience the games the way that they were intended, veteran and newbie alike. These events are organised by the Dark Souls subreddit and take place every year. The Return to Lordran event has just finished by the time I decided to cover the first game, which is just my luck, but the Return to Drangleic event for Dark Souls 2 is happening at the time of recording this script, which I'm currently playing through for a future How to Ruin a Sequel video. For as long as the servers are online, these events will ensure that future generations can have the same experience we all did on our first playthroughs. But ultimately, without the support of a large community willing to step in with things like dedicated community servers, there will come a time when it will be impossible to experience Dark Souls the way that it was intended to be played ever again. A strange concept for a mostly single-player, story-driven game. And finally, what is the future of the Souls series and the genre and the mark that it's left on the gaming landscape? I don't know if you guys know this, but Elden Ring is just around the corner. In fact, by the time this video comes out, it should probably be out next week. This is going to be the 6th game that From Software have produced using the same formula that Demon Souls laid out way back in 2009. Now, Elden Ring is going to add some new stuff. There's a sneaking mode now, which they sort of took from Sekiro. The animations look amazing. It's an open world this time, but fundamentally, the gameplay loop is pretty much the exact same. Methodical combat based around your stamina bar. Sorceries are still overpowered. You can summon NPCs now that you can kind of carry around as items. But fundamentally, it's just open world Dark Souls. And realistically, how many more times can From Software make the same game with slight variations on the theme without it getting stale and overused? It's funny because outside of the main Dark Souls franchise, the Souls genre doesn't really exist in the AAA gaming space. Neo, you could maybe argue, Neo 2 specifically, you could maybe say is a AAA game, but most of the games in the genre are still relegated to either A-level games or the indie scene. But regardless of whether the Souls franchise continues or if Souls-like games continue to be popular, its influences have seeped into the mainstream gaming culture now, and they're never going away. I mean, for God's sake, Zelda had a similar system. You know what? Zelda was basically an Elden Ring beta. I'm just gonna say it right now, okay? The survival mechanics and the eating and all that stuff, you can just forget about that. That's just stupid Nintendo crap. But there was a dodge roll, there was a stamina bar, and enemies respawn on a blood moon. I know it's not exactly the same thing as respawning when you die, but there were really obvious Dark Souls influences in that game, especially in the combat system. And if Nintendo, you know, Mario, Nintendo, those guys are looking to Dark Souls for influences for their games, you know that it's something bigger than just a flash in the pan moment. And I think regardless of whether the Souls genre becomes archaic or not, the mechanics are just no fun anymore and people are just sick of the sort of slow, methodical, stamina bar watching combat. The ethos, the message that Dark Souls sent to the gaming industry is never going to go away. The effects are going to be seen for the next 20 years in gaming. There are tons and tons of gamers out there who want well-constructed, meaningfully challenging games to test their limits and to give them a sense of progression without constantly shoving flashy set pieces and cutscenes in their face. And it's something that the two big game developing studios, because it's pretty much coalescing into two now, Sony and Microsoft, are going to have to come to terms with. So it's my hope that From Software, after Elden Ring is finished and it's finally released, that they will go on and innovate further, take a new concept and run with it and really show that gaming can be creative and it's not just about ticking all the boxes that the executives want you to. And yeah, I think that actually brings us to the end of the video. Wow-wee, it was a long one. Thank you for listening in. Took me a long time to make this one, but I think it was really worth it. When I started, when I wanted to start doing these videos, Dark Souls was always the big one. It was the one that I wanted to cover, and I wanted to make sure that I had the skills, both editing and presenting and writing, to really do it justice. And I don't think I'm ever going to be happy with this video, but it's out now, and if you're listening to this, it means you watched all the way to the end, so I must have done something right. If you've made it here so far, then maybe you might like to join my Discord server where we generally talk about games on the channel, and after every video I put up a new channel dedicated to the game that is the topic of the video. So if you want to, you can jump onto my Discord server, go to the Dark Souls tab, and we can talk about this video, the Dark Souls franchise in general, and just talk about games on the general chat. Please, I'd love to hear from you. If you're not subscribed, then maybe consider subscribing, and you can check out my channel for the rest of the Steam Pilgrimage. For those who don't know, the Steam Pilgrimage is my own little passion project where instead of constantly going and buying new games and all kinds of other things and buying humble bundles and just clogging up my backlog on Steam, I've decided that I'm going to play through all of them and make some videos about it. So if that's something you're interested in, you can use the hashtag Steam Pilgrimage on any social media to join in the conversation about that. As always, if you somehow made it to the end of this video, and this time it was a big ask, but if you did, I appreciate you more than you will ever know. Thank you so much. I wish you best of luck in getting good and keep hacking away at that backlog.